Okay, we've got another flag over
No
here.
disrespect to the,
Town flag?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Finance Committee meeting tonight. Steve, I think you're going to begin by introducing our new library director.
I will do that, just that. Noelle Bach is here and will probably make her way to the podium. I will buy her time to get there to formally introduce herself and her team. But yes, we'll be covering library, schools, and the land use department tonight, and starting with the library. Do you want this, or do you want me to do this? I'm happy to.
I can make you do that for me.
Sure, you can do so.
I have the town manager under my thumb. It's great. So as mentioned, so I'm Noelle Bach. I am the new library director as of last August. So it's already been almost 8 months, crazily enough. And I guess we can just get right down to the lovely budget. I also have with me tonight, so Jen McGeorge, who's my assistant director, waving, and Sue Contos, who is our bookkeeper, who I know you already know them as well. And I have two of my library trustees here tonight, so I have Christy Farah and Natalie Fiore over here. So they're all here to support, as is the way it should be. So as you can see, we didn't really change very much with the budget this year. I kind of kept it kind of steady as it was. You know, I like to say that the library is one of the only departments in town that's really for everybody, whether we have materials, services programs, whether you're a baby or a baby boomer, or a toddler or a teen, or anybody in between we have here. So the only really thing, we just have a couple of tiny increases that we made in the budget this year. One of them was we can't do anything about, was just our consortium, Noble, that we belong to, had a slight uptick in their fees. That happens. So that's just one of the increases. And otherwise, it's just a little bit of salary. And otherwise, it's pretty much the same as it was before. So nothing really much to talk about as far as that's concerned. And then just the little statistics thing. So I just had pulled the numbers from last October to this last, well, I guess 2020 through into then this new fiscal year. And so we have a 125% increase in circulation since fully reopening in June, which is a big jump in busyness. And I actually just today was looking at our numbers again, and we are pretty much back to where our pre-pandemic levels were, which is fantastic. So that's really good. And I was also looking at some of our other statistics and for example, our children's programming, which we brought in-person programming back for children, and that has doubled in 1 month's time. The number of people who are coming back and enjoying our children's programming. We've already increased some of the programming, and we're bringing in-person teen programming back right now, as well as more adult programming is beefing up more. So we'll probably always keep something virtual because that's also very popular. And enables a lot of people who might have difficulty otherwise getting to the library to still participate, but bringing everybody back, which is very exciting and making us everybody really happy. we like seeing the people come in to the building as well. And otherwise, thanks, Steve. You're so good. You're like, before I even say anything, oh, Rodney's even better.
I couldn't figure out how to use it.
It's like, I don't even have to say anything, and like they're just advancing for me. And this I had included because this is a tool that was created by someone actually in Massachusetts, in an association with the Massachusetts Library Association, which I'm an officer of. And it's like a nice little worksheet that you can find online that if you go to the library and say, I borrowed 10 children's books, then it'll show you, looks back. Then it'll show you how much money that you'd be saving if you were buying these things retail instead. So if you took out 10 children's books, then you'd be spending $170 if you bought them in the store. And so this is I just put in ones in all of these, and I can't even, we don't have, in this, I didn't create this worksheet, so I can't talk about, say, like the value of having like the archives that we have, which are, pretty much priceless. What we have in that collection is not even duplicatable in many ways, and that's not on here. But anything here is, it was created with a general cost of like how much it would cost in normal places, in a store or whatever, to pay for these things. And this is what we're providing to the public at any given time at the library. And so if you just did one of these things, you would save $242.35. And obviously, we have a lot of people who come in every day and use our services and our programs and our materials, daily or more often. Some people come back and forth in more than once a day. So that's just like an idea. You can look at that, and you can find this easily online. If you put in library value calculator, you can find it all over the place on the internet if you ever want to play with it. But it's a fun way to see what you're saving from the library. The library's like the best bargain in town. So that's all I really have to say. So what do you have?
Well, I'll start and say I think $7 for reference assistance is an absolute steal.
I know, right? Isn't it crazy? It's just nothing. And just you think even just the programming, people pay a large amount of money to bring their kids to swim lessons or to, a class of some sort or other, and we're providing it. And my old boss liked to say it was prepaid services, right? Because everyone is paying taxes, and your tax money is what is funding all of these things. But you only basically have to do 2 things at the library, and then you've paid off your tax money that you've invested into it. So it's really, the library's, a bargain at any which way you look at it.
Great. Eric, any questions?
I have comments.
Go ahead.
So I have to say, welcome.
Thank you, thank you.
Not completely new, but love the library and everything about it, so I'll tell you a story.
Yes, please
So,
do.
The walkabouts was not really my favorite thing, but when my little guy got to kindergarten, so he's 6 and is constantly at home with his headphones on and his walkabout, including going to school. So when we got in the car, which wasn't my car this morning, he was a little sad because I wouldn't bring the walkabout because it wasn't in my car. And so I downloaded it instantly, and we had a happy morning. So I just want to say, love the library and everything about it. So
Yes, yay, good. Victory story.
Mike?
Nope, thank you.
Thanks.
Paul?
Well, I have been using the library since my grandchildren came. And compliments every year to you, your staff. I know you're new, but previous, and the trustees. Just the jewel of Danvers. Thank you.
Mike?
Did anybody ever find Dewey Decimal?
They did. Put him out of his misery. No, just kidding.
Very modest increase,
still
I have
going.
no questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't differ from everybody else. You're right, it's the best bargain in town. Thank you. That's it.
I agree. So the salary item that is the area that increases the most, is that because of salary, a collective bargaining agreement, salary increases?
The one thing I did is that we had a head of youth services position that was overseeing 2 departments, and that was kind of an impossible task for them because what teenagers do and what children do are completely different positions. So I split those positions so that there's a head now for each of those 2 departments. So that was just a little tiny bit of money there.
So is it one more full-time employee?
So yes and no. No, actually, no. Actually, the one employee just got a bump in salary, basically, kind of thing.
So it was a reshuffling?
Yes, it was a reshuffle more than anything else. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My perennial question is about the trusts. There are 2 trusts at the library that help augment operational costs, and can you just talk a little bit about how those are used and the balances of each of them?
Well, we really only have 1 trust, yeah, because the trusts were joined, so now there's only 1 trust.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's only 1 trust now. They combined the trusts, so there's only 1. So we have our, town-funded budget. We have state aid money that we get every year for falling into their right little categories. And then we have the trust money that comes from the library trustees. And so we use that for a wide variety of purposes. Most of our programming comes out of the trustees' budget, and we use it to amplify a lot of our other budget lines as well. So if you can think about it, that we were just talking earlier today about our outreach. So hopefully last hire for a long time. We just got a community and outreach services head, and there's some money from that's actually in the trust right now. That's for her to be able to have materials and services for outreach purposes to go to all the assisted living places and the senior center and stuff like that too. So if you can think about it, we use the trust for that.
Great.
As well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions from the audience? Bill?
Yes.
Street town meeting member, thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
The one thing I would ask is, as best you can, advocate for more space to store or present more books to the public. My understanding is you literally have to refuse some books because you don't have the space. Someone buys a new book and they'd like to give it to you. Not always, there's no space.
So do you have a suggestion of how we should?
No, I'll leave that
magically
up to
have more
that fellow
space?
sitting over there how to pay for it, and the fellow sitting beside him.
Oh, okay.
Please, whatever you can, whatever's possible, advocate for some
Advocate
more.
for more space.
Yes,
Sure, okay.
that's what libraries are for.
Libraries are for all sorts of things.
Yes.
Thank you for your comment. Anything else? Ooh,
Yes.
more? I'm just giving you space.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark Zubrick. One of the questions I have is, the budget is increasing by 3.12%, right?
Altogether, yes.
How is that broken up to the trust, to the town, and to the state? Or is that an all-encompassing number?
That is just the town, oh, sorry, what are you talking about? That's just the town budget number. So yeah, so the state aid comes separately and is given to us separately by the state. And then the trust money is also allocated to us separately as we talk to the trustees about what we need.
So to operate the library, this is the town portion.
Yes.
So what are the other two portions?
Like how much?
What is the total?
Oh, what is the total? That's a good question. Sue, do you know? Of course, did I bring that piece of paper with me now?
You get 20,000 from the trust every year.
She can just repeat, if you
Oh,
could
you
just
wanna
repeat
come
what
to
Sue
the
says.
mic?
If,
Come to the mic, or I can repeat it. So we get about $20,000 from the trust fund every year.
And about 75,000.
Yeah, about 75, yeah, I think I say it's about that. Yeah, so about 70, 75,000 from the state every year. Yeah, you're welcome.
any other questions? Is there a motion?
Move the budget.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yay, thank you so much.
So next, we'll work through the divisions that comprise the land use and community services budget before we get to the schools. We start with kind of the overview. There are, as you can see from the changes across the divisions, there's pluses and minuses, but
65?
it's helpful to show the roll-up because there's a lot of collaboration and overlap in terms of staff support across these divisions, but all told, this $2 million budget is going up by just over 2.5% across the division. So we start here. This is broken out on page 65 of the budget books, and then we'll walk through each of the divisions, and then we'll look at the recreation budget separately when we get to that. So we'll start with inspectional services. There is a slight overall decrease in the staff, in the salary and wages here. And if you turn to page 67 in your budget book, that is where you will find the inspectional services budget. Counterintuitively, the staffing is actually slightly up in the budget, even though the total salary and wages portion is down. That had to do with, as we were backfilling some of the vacancies in the department, and as the dust was settling on the new setup with the planning and economic development department. So we actually increased the hours of one of our confidential office assistants in support of one of the boards and really just for overall workflow in and out of that department. In terms of so when you look at the line items, that's where you'll see some of the changes when the part-time line is down considerably. This was an employee that was working close to full-time, but the way that we categorize part-time versus full-time in Danvers, you increase the hours for that person by a couple hours a week, and they flip from the part-time line into the full-time. So there's a considerable decrease in the part-time. There's a considerable increase in the full-time, but it washes out to actually a 0.36% decrease overall for the salary wages, and it's a relatively flat operating budget. Mr. Henry and I would be happy to answer questions you have.
What's a confidential office assistant?
It's a job title that probably goes back to 30 or 50 years. It's an
Keep count over the bark kind of thing?
We have several administrative positions in that office that support the inspectional team. So they.
But it's not like they're doing secret work.
No. They're.
We can't answer that.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Sally, that was good. Sally, any questions?
I guess, I noticed that zoning expenses are decreased in this budget, but increased in one of the others. I just assume it's being flipped from one to the other. And the only other increase of any note is a $1,000 increase in training services. Any particular rationale?
We've had turnover in the department, so we want to be able to send our new assistant building official to trainings and seminars and the like. So we just want to make sure we're investing in the employees in the department.
I was thinking how it's really impressive that in fiscal '22, the permitting system has finally gone paperless. It's something we've talked about for a few years. That must have been a big undertaking to finally be able to say it's been done. And the C of O for the Smith School also, I'm sure, was a lot of work for inspectional services.
Yes.
So I wanted to just thank them for those things.
We'll have a discussion Thursday on ripping the Band-Aid off and going paperless this year, but we also, with the support of the ARPA funds, are launching a organization-wide e-permitting platform. So in the past, we've had some departments doing only paper permits, some departments using a proprietary permit platform. One of the key takeaways during the pandemic, as we were doing more business online, was the need to have a standard platform, which is important both for customer service and also on the back end. If you have 4 or 5 departments that are signing off on plans, this pushes that information out and handles it sequentially instead of having to take things from office to office. So we'll get into that Thursday, but that was sort of step one, was making the leap.
Great.
Ted?
I think that's it for me. I'm good.
Mike?
The building commissioner's office is completely fully staffed now, right?
Yes.
That's all I got, thank you.
I'm all set, thank you.
Mike?
Yep, so.
Eric? Any questions from the audience?
I'll move the article.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Yeah, we actually vote the land use.
Oh, all together.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep, so we'll go back when we're ready, when we get to that point. So next up is public health. And you can see here, there's an increase in salary wages and a decrease in the operating expenses. We currently have a vacancy in this department. The sanitarian position we're in the process of recruiting and filling that. We welcomed our new health director on board a couple months ago. Frank Giacalone is a Beverly resident who was working as the health director up in Newburyport for quite some time, and was very excited to move closer to home and join the team. He's working out very well, and that vacancy we had been holding for the arrival of the new director so that they would be able to pick the person that they were going to work with. We also fund our public health nurse out of this budget and a part-time inspector. And I said, Frank is settling in and working very well with the board, bringing a lot of good ideas. And it's nice to have a seasoned vet sort of steering that ship. We're coming out of a very turbulent time with the pandemic, so we're glad to have Frank on board. And we'd be happy to take any questions you have about public health.
Eric? Mike?
Is this a budget where there was a substantial amount of reimbursement from some of the COVID money for extra stuff that got done during the last year and a half or so?
And the answer is yes, but not even necessarily line items in this budget, but
yeah, extra
new
stuff
services that
yeah.
we were providing, testing, vaccination clinics, and so a lot of the work that was coming out of it. And in particular, we noted this with the select board, but I would also I'd be remiss not to call out Judith Ryan, our public health nurse, for the tremendous work that she did during the pandemic. she was everywhere all the time, and really accomplished quite a bit.
Paul?
I don't have any real questions, other than the sanitarian, that's the position that's open?
Yep.
Would you describe the?
It's an inspection, so it's a position that does a lot of restaurant and grease trap inspections, septic inspections, depending on the license that the person holds. So we've used, that position has been filled both as a sanitarian. For a while, it was being used as an assistant director position, but it's really, we're working with the director, and he's identified that he'd really like to get a licensed sanitarian on board for the inspectional load.
Mike?
No questions.
Ted?
No questions for me.
Sally?
Thank you. I agree that the public health nurse was amazing during the course of the, those darkest months of the pandemic. But I note that, she's down for 0.85 of a full-time, of a FTE. And it just always seems odd to me. Why isn't the public health nurse full-time? I don't know that there's a reason that can be given in this form tonight, but if there was a chance to make it full-time, I think it'd be a really valuable thing for the town.
I think I remember the answer to this question from last year, but go ahead.
I think she's pretty content with
Yeah.
the hours that she's working.
Yeah.
I think she'd like to stop
That's
working
what I
80
remember
hours.
too.
I think that's the answer, yeah.
She doesn't want to be full-time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, she's been working about 80 hours a week,
Right.
give or take, for quite some time. So it's budgeted at 0.85. That's worked very well for her. If a case were made to move that to full-time, there wouldn't be much resistance from the budget team to do that.
Give me your number. No, I'm just kidding.
I think everybody in Danvers has her number at this point. She did a lot of the contact tracing herself, so,
Yeah.
on her personal cell phone.
Any questions from the audience?
Hi, Tim Donahue, Precinct 4 meeting member. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Line item on here is pest control at $32,500. Is that for municipal properties only, or is that for trouble areas in town?
Facilities important.
All right, thank you much.
Mark?
I'd like to, if I may, follow up one of the questions that was raised. This is a budget for this coming fiscal year.
Correct.
So there's no anticipated increase in staff or any emergency measures in this budget.
No, this is the base.
So that's
Yeah.
the base. But the question that was raised earlier is how much of the current budget or current funds that are available are being reimbursed by the COVID, whatever you call them, American Rescue Plan, or, state or federal funds?
So none. So I'm going to use, since we're talking about Judith, for example, her salary is budgeted here. Her paycheck each week is paid out of the salary line. All of the overtime she was working to keep up with contact tracing and conduct testing, et cetera, would have been tracked and submitted for reimbursement through the state. So it didn't affect the tax-supported budget per se. The costs that were above and beyond what was in the budget, the town did a very good job of getting reimbursed for. So it wasn't offsetting line items. It was to cover those costs that were not anticipated or contemplated in the budget.
So
And
those,
the ARPA is prospective, so there would be CARES Act and some of the FEMA reimbursements that were
Right.
used for that. Yeah.
so what you're telling me is that the budget for 2022 has been whole, and if there were any overruns on that budget, they would have been covered by reimbursement from the state, like for the nurse.
Yeah, yes, in all likelihood. And obviously, when we get to town meeting, any transfers that need to happen that aren't covered, we don't know of any at this point, but
I would just add that, so the CARES Act is closed now, so we still have FEMA as a potential reimbursement for certain costs, and then we have ARPA funding for moving forward.
So those activities have taken place as we went along. Thank you.
Okay.
Next is planning and economic development. And there's an increase here beyond what we've seen elsewhere, and that's driven in really by two things. There was a market adjustment this year for the director, and the relatively new position, the planning tech, which was a position that was put in place after the zoning, the high-level zoning work shifted from inspectional services to the planning and economic development department. We used an existing administrative position and a part-time inspector position to create this planning tech, which is a boots-on-the-ground position to help with making sure that approved site plans are being adhered to go and do inspections for zoning complaints or infractions, et cetera. The position was wildly successful as a shared position between the departments, so there's actually, we're increasing those hours. So it was designed as a benefited, essentially three-quarter time position. It's going to be a full-time position moving forward. So those are the two changes in the salary wages driving the 5% that you see on the screen. And again, similar to the inspectional services budget, that's why when you look in the line items, you'll see a significant decrease in the part-time hours and a significant increase in the full-time hours. And again, that's because one position flipped over from part-time to full-time. It was a benefited position to begin with, but the hours increased, and so the way it's displayed in the budget changed. We'd be happy to take any questions.
Eric?
One question. Fiscal year 23 strategic goals. Can you explain, I'm on the right one, life science and biomanufacturing staging? What is that?
I might let Mr. Henry tackle that one. I could do it partial justice. He'll do it full justice.
One of the economic development clusters that we have on the North Shore region is life science manufacturing, and the Massachusetts Biotech Council has a number of things that communities can do to be ready themselves for certain processes that happen in that cluster. And so we, I think, obtained certification a couple of years ago, and then you can go from certified to bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. And we, as a staff, feel that that's something that we should continue to pursue. So Mr. Fields, our Planning and Economic Development Director, is going to be looking at trying to move us up. I think he'd like to obtain gold standard. I can't remember off the top of my head if it's silver or gold, but we want to move up that ladder a little bit. And that helps us also with marketing. So the Mass Biotech Council, when they go to trade shows, they're in California, they're in Ireland, they're in these hot spots. They're marketing Massachusetts while they're there. And if you can get to that standard, you can start to get included in that, in those marketing materials. And again, we have a cluster up on Cherry Hill, and we have a cluster out on Electronics Avenue. And we think that part of our success going forward will be to find a way to build on what's already here.
Mike?
Who's providing the direct support to the zoning board now? Is it Mr. Fields, or is it, okay. How is that transition? Has it been, that's been over the last 18 months or so, right?
I think it's been good, as Steve alluded. The planning tech position has been a big help in that we're able now to follow up better on project approvals and making sure that what was approved is what's getting built on the ground, but also zoning enforcement, I think, has been improved through the process. You'd have to ask the ZBA how they enjoy our staffing them, but I think in general, I think it's going well. We have not heard to the contrary. Of course, if we have complaints, we'd love to hear them to improve our service, but I think it's going well.
Good.
Oh.
Does this, yesterday I mentioned growth. This ties in with growth, correct? Huge. But my question is, well, I guess it just came to my mind. What's the status with the Maple Street area? Can you give us a little update on that, or not?
Stay tuned.
Well, I saw one of the meetings, and that's why I couldn't make heads or tails out of where they were. They've had one plan, I believe, and maybe you can fill.
There was a plan about a year ago that did not receive final permitting. They needed zoning relief for that plan. That was denied in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals, so that effectively killed their parallel application in front of the Planning Board. Subsequent to that, they went back to the planning board to file a subdivision plan. So a lot of people were confused about the filing of that subdivision plan. And what that was a legal strategy on the behalf of the development team to freeze the zoning. Massachusetts has a very arcane statute that allows you to freeze zoning if you can get a definitive plan approved, and that freezes the zoning book for 8 years. Because they were concerned about what the future may bring and their permitting environment changing underneath them, they sought to achieve the freeze. So it was just a paper exercise, but it caused a lot of confusion in the community that there was some ulterior motive going on. As Steve said, they are working with our office right now on a submission for, I think, something much more in line with what town meeting adopted in the 40R district in 2017. We don't have a date yet for a hearing, but I expect that to be done in the next month or so.
And just to clarify, when Aaron talks about freezing the zoning in place, this is the new zoning. So this is a pretty standard maneuver, and it is not to grandfather in some old zoning. This is the zoning that town meeting approved in 2020. They've analyzed that. They have a project they think complies with that, so they take that step to make sure that is the zoning that will be applied to whatever they come forward with. So, but I think it's, I would hazard to go so far as say it's imminent. I mean, there will be information coming out pretty soon, we think.
Yep.
Okay, so basically, if I understand what you're saying, they moved from the initial plan, which looked to me like, is that when the CVS was there and looked like it was more like an apartment type complex in the back or around that area with a restaurant bordering, and now they're talking.
Similar site plan without the CVS drive-through.
But the term you just used, I think you said, that wasn't residential, but.
Mixed use?
No. Never mind, I'll come up with it and I'll come back.
I'm going to make a suggestion that we.
We'd be happy to take this offline and.
Well, I'd like to suggest we thumbtack this conversation until the planning board has a set of plans in front of them for public discussion.
All right, fine. That's it.
Mike?
Yeah, how about the development where the old Friendlies used to be? People's United Bank, did they sell that to another person, from what I understand? And that might be a restaurant?
I don't know if a sale has gone through. The old Friendlies was East Boston Savings sold to Rockland Trust.
Yep.
Rockland Trust put the Friendlies building on the market. I don't know the status of that as of 2 weeks ago, but they have put that on the market.
Okay. And just to follow up from Mr. Bradstreet the other night, I think it appears that the planning board and the zoning board now having staff do the answering of the questions rather than somebody representing a client kind of telling them what the situation is. So I'm glad to see that turnover because that's the way it should be. Thank you.
I have a couple questions, more planning oriented than budget. Can you walk us through where we are with respect to maintaining our compliance with affordable housing thresholds and make your best prediction of how that might trend over the next 12 months?
Do you want to take it?
It's going to be tight. I think if things play out over the next 6 months, we should be okay, but I'm not going to tell you that it's going to be tight. We're probably in the neighborhood of 30 units, one way or the other. So some of these projects that are in the pipeline, we need them to happen if that's your angle. You know, I mean, if you want to stay, we're close.
Yeah, my angle is to stay.
DHCD won't certify that until later this year, so we're kind of.
So but when it's measured by units, does the occupancy of the units get evaluated, or it's literally just units?
It's just a numerator denominator.
Yep, units.
So you can have literally little one-bedroom studios.
Yep.
If you have enough of them relative to your total housing stock, that
Correct.
gets you over 10%.
Yep. There is an exception to that in the sense of some group homes and whatnot, they're counting beds there because the beds are separate households in some of those situations, but generally speaking, it's units.
And relative to the last 5 years, how close are we? Like, is this like are we continually bouncing along this and like narrowly avoiding going below, or are we drifting closer?
I think from a regulatory standpoint, the bylaw we adopted at the last town meeting, I don't know that there's more we need to do from a regulatory standpoint. I think we have a strong inclusionary bylaw. Downtown zoning has an inclusionary provision, so now it's one size fits all. Or I shouldn't say it's one size fits all. There's one rule for the entire town. That's a uniform rule. So now we just have to make sure that we stay above our 10%.
And how long do we have to like remedy before hostile 40 Act development can take place?
I see Mr. Trask wants to weigh in, but I think in general, it's hard to say. Once the certification, if we were to dip under, the ticket window opens. And then it does not close until you've approved a project and DHCD agrees you've approved the project. But
So hypothetically, if you had a project that was through the permitting, or had been before and was approved by the regulatory boards in Danvers, ground hasn't been broken, DHCD sees that, they see the approvals. There is some flexibility in working with the state in making determinations about, if you go to the state and say, well, we have this great idea that in 10 years we're gonna build our own housing, so we'd like to be protected, they're gonna say, try again. But without being explicit, what Mr. Henry's describing is that we may be fine in a couple of months.
Yeah.
But really, it'll be
we may
September,
be fine
October.
now. We may be
Correct.
fine now,
Yeah.
but it's definitely tight.
And historically, we've always been, I mean, as long as I've been here 7.5 years now, we've always been within 0.5% of 10%. So we've never been at 20%.
So we've always kept you on your toes.
Yeah, it's always been close.
I think systemically, the census recount, we have a strong system here, better than the last towns I was in. I think one of the issues here, though, was that there are some of these conversion projects, and that seems to be, I know when this came up, I was charged with kind of looking at how we might have miscalculated, and it appears that it's some of the conversion projects that don't come through the system as new building permits, because the structure already has a CO, and that seems to be where the biggest delta occurred. So we're trying to make amends, and I think that's where the e-permitting will be helpful, because it'll be easier to catch some of those conversion projects.
And then the second thing, the cluster development stuff that we were talking about in November, last fall, is that like tabled, or is that something that's still contemplated for down the road?
That was approved.
Cluster went through.
Was it the
plan-
warrant article that was?
The one that was, there was a joint, sort of a 2-article proposal that would have eliminated use variances and introduced planned development projects, which essentially was it was codifying a path that already exists where a property owner can go straight to town meeting with an idea. And the example we used was Liberty Tree Mall, where you have a hodgepodge of parcels, and the zoning that's on the ground right there may not necessarily be conducive to what the future holds for places like that, indoor malls. So this would explain to them a process where they could come to town meeting effectively with a master plan and say, this is what we'd like to do with our property over the next 15 years, 2 or 3 business cycles. Town meeting can conceptually bless that, and then they can go back and start to develop it piece by piece as they go forward. So that was, the cluster development was approved in the fall.
But the plan development was tabled.
It was tabled
So
for further study.
the conversation around use variances, elimination, and enabling plan development was tabled. I don't know if we'll be coming back to that. We are trying to give town meeting members a break from zoning, and so trying to avoid a zoning town meeting this fall.
Understood. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we get any further, Guard, did you still want to comment?
If you don't mind, I just want to make sure that, so I'm going to take off my select board chair hat, and I'm going to put on my chairman of the Affordable Housing Trust hat. And everything that was asked and answered was accurate. A couple of things people should know. Right now, the census has not yet been certified. So we are currently above our 10% threshold. When it is certified, then that's when the numerator denominator comes in, and we would be slightly below. We have several projects already in the pipeline waiting for approval. They have already been built, they've already been issued COs, they're already finalizing their paperwork with DHCD, which is notoriously very slow. We have those in the pipeline. We've also been working as the Affordable Housing Trust with the Planning Board in the town to add the provisions that were in the 40R in the overlay district. Anything built downtown now as part of the overlay district will have a requirement to build 25% of those units as affordable. We're trying to use that to catch up, as it were. Or I shouldn't say catch up so much as not fall behind when you do a lot of one-family to two-family conversions, because that is what happened over the past 10 years, is these little projects happened and slowly lowered the numbers, the delta for us. We have several in the pipeline now that are being discussed, and if they come to fruition within the next 6 months, as Aaron said, we'll be well above our 10%, and that will help us set a baseline that keeps continually keeping us above 10% with the other projects. And that 10% will be good for 10 years until the next census comes along. So I don't want people to think that we're in immediate danger of a 40B. That's why I got involved 15 years ago or more, when that happened over on Route 1 South. And that's part of the charge of the Affordable Housing Trust, is to keep us above the 10%, but also to create affordable units in town as well. Thank you.
Sally?
I don't have any questions, thanks.
Mr. Chid, when was the last time that we fell below the threshold? Do you know? Over a decade, right?
Over a decade.
Yeah.
State hospital put you over.
That's right.
So we haven't since.
2000 census, Bill.
Yeah.
Correct.
It was finished in 13, but it was started in 12.
We've been in good shape for quite a while. We've been able to stave off. And developers look for communities that fall well below 40B and that are desirable to build in. That's why you have a lot of interest in the Hamilton, Wenham area and a lot of other communities around us. But they won't even apply for 40B. There is, however, a provision called a friendly 40B, where if the Affordable Housing Trust recommends to the Select Board and they approve, there are going to be times there are projects that are beneficial. And so 40B shouldn't just be thought of as a bad, horrible thing. It can be abused by developers who wish to abuse it if the community is below the DHCD thresholds.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the audience? Okay.
Next is senior and social services. The budget is, it's a level service budget, no changing in staffing really. The main change here, we are increasing the hourly wage that we're paying our van drivers. The entire region is having a hard time finding van drivers, so.
Can they plow snow too?
We could probably, I was gonna, okay, they said. Are being outvoted. We could put plows in the front of school vans.
They don't have a CDL.
No, CR, the answer is no. And not really budgetary, but one of the things, the senior center was, I think, uniquely impacted by the pandemic. They serve a population that was sort of especially vulnerable, and they did their best to provide services virtually to their passionate clientele. So they're very excited to be back in person, and I know one of the goals mentioned in the budget this year is to really get the adult daycare program back on its feet. That was one of the highest demand and I think most critically needed programs that we ran out of the senior center. So I know Pam is thrilled to be having that up and running again. And I know we had I'm surprised Bill's here. I think the men's dinner was tonight.
Delicious.
Booted the planning board out of the space. They had to have a public hearing tonight up in the town manager's conference room because the men's supper took priority. But they're happy to be open again, and we'd be happy to take any questions you have about the senior center.
Sally?
Well, my husband is a driver now, and so I shouldn't vote on this budget, but he really enjoys it. He went in to ask if he could volunteer, play chess or something. They said, oh, we really need drivers, so he went from being an Uber driver to a senior center van driver.
That's quite a pitch. You play chess, would you like to drive a van?
Can you drive? Yeah.
It worked.
It did, apparently, yeah.
It's vehicular chess.
Ted?
I don't think I have any questions, thanks.
Mike?
very cordial staff down there. I have no questions.
Paul?
So, excuse me, no questions.
Mike?
Nope, thank you.
Eric?
So I had a question, I don't know, Sally may answer it. Do the drivers need to be 7D certified or just regular mass driver's license?
Yes, 70s, they need strap hands in the morning.
They just need a regular driver's license.
Questions from the audience? Mark?
Thank you. One of the questions that has been raised over the last couple of years is, this is the Danvers Senior Center. However, what's been reported is that it's functioning more of a social service program instead of just senior center. So that's no longer just the Danvers Senior Center. Now, the funding that you're getting, that you're estimating here, is that part of the total cost of the senior center and the social services? Or is that supported by state and federal grants and funds? That's, because there's two components to that center.
So I would say similar to the library, you're looking at the tax-supported portion. There are additional funds. Pam and her staff do a good job of securing grants. Many of those grants are operating grants, so they get them year to year to supplement and provide additional programs. The Friends of the Senior Center also provide funds to support the programming that happens there. So similar to recreation, similar to library, what you're looking at here is just the tax-supported part of what they do there.
So the question then comes down to is the senior center for the Danvers seniors, or is it for the region? That's the question that's been raised over and over again, and, talking to people.
I'm not sure I understand. I mean, I've attended lunches there where we've had seniors from Peabody and elsewhere who attend programs at the Danvers Senior
Right.
Center. So that I don't think that they would exclude members, members from the regional residents who are participating in some
It's
of that
not unusual to
programming
hear
there.
about a Danvers resident attending something at the
Right.
Peabody Senior Center. It's
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. No, that's fine. But the thing is that the costs of the senior center are being borne by the Danvers taxpayers. Now, the functions and the obligations of the senior center, including the social services, what is the cost of the whole operation? Because that's what really needs to be looked at instead of just the tax-supported piece.
I mean, we can bring that, we don't have that information at our fingertips, but I would note a lot of the people who attend the programming there are either paying out of pocket to participate in a program, or there are operating grants that offset and support their attendance there. I'm not going to say that happens in 100% of cases, but much of what they do there is, there's a fee associated with that. But I guess if your question is, are you looking for a roll-up of the grants?
Total cost
Yeah,
of
we can have
the
that for
seniors.
tomorrow night, or Thursday night.
Okay, great. Because, I've attended, different functions, and I've done programming out of there. And the thing is that it's a great facility, but a lot of time it's not being occupied, or residents don't seem to attend it. So that's my question is it, well, that's my question.
Yeah, I guess, I just to clarify, this is the first I've heard that concern. Is the concern that there are programs that are being attended mostly by non-residents?
No, no,
Okay.
no, that's not the question. The question is are these services that are being provided at the senior center for the Danvers seniors? And being a senior, I like to know that.
Can you define what a senior is, Mark?
Oh, it's just like, you
Well,
that.
yeah. I'm gonna head this one off and say the short answer is yes, and we'll have the numbers for Thursday night.
Fine, thank you.
Okay.
Hold on, Mark. I've got a question. Are you alluding to, I'll take the bite. Are you alluding to the fact that there are younger people participating in
No.
services there? Because
No.
that's the only.
No, the only thing I'm getting at is that the senior center, as it operates, provides more social services than senior services, because it provides other than senior occupations or entertainment or whatever.
But you're not concerned about people under the age of being a senior being serviced there, you said, right?
No, that's never been a concern.
Okay, so what is the problem?
The problem is it for Danvers, or is it for
Well,
the region?
It's been answered that there are situations in which we can't limit in certain scenarios. I guarantee you that there are certain grants from the state that would require us not to be able to turn
That's
somebody
right.
away who qualifies under otherwise for it. We have programs that are there. Certainly, if there was a complaint, if you were able to give a complaint that indicated that Danvers residents were not able to enjoy the
Facility,
operation, the
right.
facility, because they were being forced out, there doesn't appear to be any indication that that's the case. So what's the problem?
The problem is that we have fixed costs that we're incurring as a town, the taxpayers.
Yeah.
And that's what it's meant to
So do
support.
you think we're going to pay less if we don't let the people from the other towns come?
No. No.
And what's the problem then?
Oh, Michael.
Well, no, Mark. You come up here and you do this, and the reality of it is that if you have a problem with people who aren't from Danvers going there, just say it. That's fine. If you think that we're spending money on people or that Danvers residents aren't able to take advantage of it, let us know that. But that isn't what the case is.
That's part of the case.
So you are
because-
saying that there are Danvers residents who are unable to enjoy the facilities up there because people from other communities are using it?
That's what has been reported, yes. And that's why I even went to the senior center administrator and, we did a program on what they're, providing for the residents. But there have been reports that people are not welcome in there.
We will follow up with this with Pam and
Okay.
That would be great. Thank you.
sure.
Thank you, Mark. Any other comments? Thank you.
Next on our list is Veteran Services. And we spoke briefly in the benefits budget about the fact that the benefits portion of this budget is funded through our benefits and insurance budget. That is due to the fact that the benefits paid out is actually greater than the operating budget for the division. And about 6 years ago, I think, we realized by having the benefits budgeted as part of the small operating budget, when the year-to-year fluctuation would occur in those benefits being paid, it would require budget transfers by town meeting to make sure that the budget stayed intact. So by budgeting that in the $11+ million benefits budget, it meant that we had adequate resources to cover the Chapter 115 benefits that Danvers veterans qualified for. So in this budget, we have Kelly Reyes Teixeira, who is our Veteran Service Officer, Leanne Pulio, who supports her administratively, and then 50% of Lisa Westrate, which is a position that is shared by both Veteran Services and the Senior Center, helping with some of the healthcare-related needs of our clientele. So it's 2.5 FTEs providing the service. Kelly has settled in and is doing a good job in her role. She replaced Peter Morandi in this role. And really, what looks like a budget decrease here, Kelly's pursuing a degree. She has indicated she does not plan to take any classes this year, so we've zeroed out the tuition reimbursement for her for this particular year, anticipating that we'll be budgeting in again in FY24 when she's ready to start up again. Happy to take any questions.
Eric?
No questions.
Mike?
Nope.
Paul?
All set?
Mike?
No questions.
Ted?
No questions.
And Sally?
I've got nothing, thank you.
Questions from the audience? Yep.
So this is a relatively small item, but it is general office supplies have tripled on this budget. Is there something significant we're planning to buy for this office?
So I think this is as part of pulling it out from public health. It was always nested in public health. It's been a little bit of a guess as to how many of those supplies that public health used to purchase were public health supplies or were they veteran supplies. So there has been a little bit of feeling out as far as what she needs to support the 2.5 FTE.
Anything else?
Do we now need a motion for this entire?
We now need a motion for,
So moved.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I abstain.
And one abstention.
I cover the recreation separate.
Recreation.
Separate.
So last under the land use umbrella is the recreation department. And there's an increase in the full-time headcount this year, which we can explain when you look at the salary and wage detail sheets on page 78 of the budget. You'll see that the increase in full-time salary and wage is largely offset by decreases in the part-time salary and wage. Chris Sanborn made the case during the budget process year, which we supported, which was to use several of those part-time ranger positions to create another full-time ranger to support the excessive, extensive use and wear and tear on the park to make sure that it's in good working order, that the barns are in good shape, fencing, et cetera. And Chris has a good partnership there at the park with the Friends of Endicott. There's a lot that they contribute to the park. It appears like an addition, but it's being offset by several part-time positions being rolled into that. Several other increases, we would anticipate questions. There's an increase in the, Endicott Park maintenance and the grounds maintenance. Those are both related to maintenance of open space. So making sure that we're doing a good job of, knocking down the growth in some of our open space parcels, because if that goes unmanaged for a couple of years, rather than mowing small trees, you're now having to cut trees that are really establishing themselves. And then there's also an operating increase for the barn that's related to food for some of the most popular Danvers employees that occupy the animal barn, and also some granite shavings to keep up with trail maintenance at the park. So similar, we sort of point out each year, we invest $1 million from the tax levy into our recreation department, and they usually turn around and generate 2.5 or 3 times that value in programming for the community. So David and Nick and their teams do a really good job providing, I think, well-received services. And we're happy to take any questions.
Sally?
So this budget, thank you, Sierra, this budget includes those programming by the rec department, but also Endicott Park.
Endicott Park, yeah, the recreation has always overseen Endicott Park. Probably 3 years ago now, Public Works used to budget for some of the small capital needs of the park and some of the maintenance expenses at the park, some of the supplies for the barn and whatnot. So we moved those expenses out of Public Works and into the recreation department several years ago. So this encompasses open space, the administrative staff that puts together the programming and oversees them, the full-time staff that supports some of our revolving fund programs and the like.
So in the budget book, in the description of fiscal year 2022 accomplishments, they say they provided full year of after-school childcare program. Does that mean that was done, during periods when kids were in school or when kids were learning?
With both.
So there were after-school childcare programs even when kids were at home learning?
Yeah, one of the unique things Recreation did in partnership with the schools during the first year of the pandemic was to have on-site all-day recreation programming was at the Vi Gym. So the kids who were on the AB schedules who needed care could go there with their laptops and have recreation staff available to help them do their work. So it was kind of came together on the fly, but worked out pretty well for not a lot of families, but the families that used it, I think, really appreciated it.
And now that kids are in schools, the after-school program is operating as it did before.
As it was, yeah.
And I know for a time, it started out kind of slow in just one school and then two. Is it now in all five of
All
the?
five.
Of the elementary schools? Is there anything at the junior high level or even the high school level? No, so it's just, I shouldn't say just, it's in the elementary schools.
Yeah, that question does come up from time to time, and I think the answer normally is, by the time they hit middle school, extracurricular activities start to take up their afternoons, and some of them are then old enough that they would go home and wait for a parent. So they have found not a huge demand for this type of programming at the middle school level.
Okay, thank you.
Ted?
How do we measure park visits?
Aaron, do you get that question? The question is, how do we measure park visits?
Programming numbers to some events that are at the park, so there are certain events that happen at Endicott Park, so we do that, but we also use the parking ranger. So how many people are paying for parking at the park plugs into that.
So it's understated, because if you've ever been passed on the right, you know that we're not capturing all of the park attendees.
Mike?
That's it for me.
A travel allowance, $3,600. There wasn't anything on there before.
That's it. We have an employee, our assistant recreation director, who for many years, he's all over the place in his personal vehicle. He was tracking his mileage and being reimbursed for it, and we using that information, we made the switch this year. Rather than having him keep an Excel spreadsheet and have to submit on a regular basis, we converted him to an auto reimbursement.
Are we assuming, is the town assuming all the expenses for the dog park now, or is the original people that started up the fund for that, are they contributing?
So the park was built using a $300,000 grant from the Stanton Foundation, and has received several supplemental grants to cover some of the sort of retrofits and operating needs after that, but that is coming to an end. I think we have maybe one more year, very modest funding from them. We have a partnership with the Friends of the Dog Park, who do contribute monetarily from time to time, but it is mostly a recreation department expense at this point, on a moving forward basis.
Okay. And one more kind of a comment. You've got a park ranger supervisor, a park ranger foreman, and then you've got a park ranger. Is the park ranger foreman, is he a worker also, or is he just you got like two supervisors?
Yeah,
and
these are
one-
all working positions, yeah.
And I was a
Instead of
I
a
was
raise,
a foreman for
instead
10
of a
or-
raise, they got the title.
It's a little like the confidential assistant position.
No,
where-
I had 10 or 12 people under me as a foreman. I never saw one foreman that had one person as a worker.
Everybody over there wears work boots to work in the morning, and they're outside working all day long.
That's right.
I actually do have one more question.
All right.
Can I jump back
I'll
in
let
real
it
quick?
go from there.
Do you have an estimate of how many of these expenses would be eligible for CPA?
I think probably, no, not off the top of my head. Certainly not again, 80% of this budget is people, so that would not be. But I'm not familiar enough with the program to be able to
Certainly
answer
the
that.
beach sand. It's one of my favorite.
Okay.
Beach sand?
The beach sand, yeah.
Certainly work on the buildings. I mean, those are historic buildings. They
Right.
would qualify probably under both open space and recreation facilities, or historic, so maybe all three, like the carriage house, the hay barn project that was put on ice a couple years ago.
Okay.
Oh,
Does the park handle their own grounds maintenance, or is Public Works still involved with that?
It's well, I wouldn't say 100%, but it's largely done in-house by the park staff. They contract out for certain things. We're gonna do some grading there this summer that is beyond the capacity of any of the machinery that we own. But Public Works is there from time to time, but I would say 90% of it is done by the Endicott Park staff.
And Public Works takes care of all the playgrounds, parks, the ball fields, all those fields.
Four-string grounds.
Right. Those fields and the Public Work, all those particular parks, playing fields, they're open to the public, but they don't prevent out-of-towners from coming in and being part of those, any activities. that could take place there. For instance, softball leagues, and I'm not saying, I don't want to use that term, but like an adult recreation type program where you get a group together and maybe one guy or one female from out of town.
Mr. Landers will probably correct me if I'm wrong, and Mr. Mountain, who's at home watching on TV, will text me momentarily and correct me. But field permitting, I mean, if you're going to do an organized activity like that,
Right.
we have a policy that preferences high schools sports first, then local organization. So in theory, once in a while, you will see an out-of-town or a non-town affiliated recreational sports league going. But in theory, they've only gotten the field because nobody from town has requested it.
And
that's at this-
you've answered my question basically, but because you're not really excluding them, it's just a matter of availability at that point.
Right.
And let's say everything was an in-town league, per se, whatever particular activity, whatever.
And
but
we
there
take 'em
could
down
be
to the
members of
Gaga
team
pit
from
and-
outside.
What's that?
There could be members from a specific team from outside, you know,
Sure.
adult groups. I know they've had that in the
Yeah.
past, yeah.
Yep. But at that point, you know,
Yeah.
no local
As
organization
we would
has-
be going maybe to another town or park or field.
Right.
in
I would
a
say
neighborhood.
over, especially after the pandemic. I mean, right now, adult recreational sports is not in high demand. And again, I think maybe there's one pickup soccer game happening right now that I'm aware of. So it's not a lot of usage from out-of-towners.
But we're not excluding folks.
No, but we do have a preference policy to make sure that
Sure.
our leagues get them first.
Right.
Mike?
No, good, thank you.
Eric?
I do have a couple questions on revenue. If you just speak a little bit about revenue. I'm thinking particularly the fees, because this is one area where fee for service, you know, happens. It's a part of the regular business. Both how much that helps, you know, and I don't necessarily need the hard number, don't have to pull a budget out, but how you arrive at, one, the programs are always very affordable, so I'm interested in, you know, your thought process behind use of revenue.
On the childcare side, the childcare revolving side, we generally try, you know, we're not trying to make money, we're just trying to cover our expenses, and we're constantly looking at our competitors, the YMCA, other programs in the region, private daycare providers, after-school providers, to make sure that we're affordable. We're not in it to make money, we're in it to provide a service to working families in town. So again, we're very conscious of our price point. As Steve alluded to, in the senior budget, I mean, we have had inflationary wages due to increase in minimum wage in Massachusetts. So again, some costs have gone up, and inevitably those costs have to be passed on to the users. Rec programming, again, same thing. We're not in it for the money. We're trying to cover our costs and not much more than that, and buy the supplies that we need to entertain the kids. So again, we're very price conscious, and we're, you know, not looking to make money, just trying to make enough to provide interesting opportunities. And you know, we're constantly tinkering with it. You'll see programs maybe only one time that don't come back a second time because there wasn't a lot of interest, but we're constantly trying.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments from the audience? Is there a motion?
Move the Recreation Department budget.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Moving into the schools. And,
Thank you all very much.
thank you. Chairman Crane, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Mr. Chairman, and members of the Finance Committee.
We do have a copy of our budget if anybody would like one. I'm the chair.
Mary's got them. I am Eric Crane, Chair of the School Committee this year. With me are both of our co-acting superintendents, Mary Wermers and Keith Taverna, who both, I think, escaped the kindergarten orientation tonight. That was your first stop. So there you go. There you go. So we're happy to talk about our budget tonight. I am just going to kick it off, and then Keith will give you a lot more detail. But we first looked at a budget in March that had an increase of 3.69, I'm sorry, February, that had an increase of 3.69%. That budget basically paid for contractual commitments that we already had. There was a net gain of one position at the Smith School as an aide, and there was from the teacher standpoint, one less elementary teacher because of enrollment at the Thorpe School, and one increase of an elementary teacher at Smith, so that was kind of a net zero. About 93% of that budget was for special education and salaries. In March, we found out the governor was fully funding, at least in his budget, fully funding the Student Opportunity Act. And that as a result, Danvers was going to receive an additional $673,577 specifically for the schools. And so because of that, we're going to be able to do some things that the original budget would not have let us do. It'll result in an additional $30 per student for general funding. It's going to allow us to avoid the elimination of 3 full-time equivalent positions at the high school, and will be utilized at the high school to restructure support plans and programs for high-need students in the Therapeutic Learning Center, Drive and Fundamentals programs, and we're also going to use it to continue to grow and support the early college program, which was actually, we had a great presentation last night at our school committee on the early college program. It's also going to allow us to increase staffing a bit for ESL, English as a Second Language learners. We're also adding a couple of teacher aides to deal with student behaviors at the middle school and high school. And a big thing for us that I think is a terrific thing we're going to be able to do is, right now, you may know, student psychologists chair the IEP meetings for students who have special needs. There is an individual education plan every year, and there's a team meeting with teachers, the parents, and a plan is developed. Well, normally those are led by our school psychologists. In this budget, we're planning on adding 2 positions that will simply be team chairs. They will take over the role of leading those meetings and organizing the IEP meetings so that the psychologists can have more time to do direct services to students. We have seen since the pandemic and students returning to school many more issues with student behavior and student anxieties, and a greater need for our students to have access to mental health services, which in the community are very hard to come by. So the idea that we can use some of our school psychologist time, an increased amount of our school psychologist time, to provide those services, we think is going to help immensely with our student population. So in the end, when we add that additional $73,000 into the budget, we are requesting a 4.37% increase, but much of that is based on the Student Opportunity Act funding. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Keith and Mary as necessary for a deeper presentation. Oh, one more thing, I'm sorry. It wouldn't be right of me not to acknowledge Keith Taverna, who has been our assistant superintendent for operations, for business, for human resources, and anything else that the schools or the town manager needs from the schools. He's the go-to guy. And Keith will be leaving us at the beginning of June. And we just want to say we appreciate all you've done through the years. So this is unfortunately the last budget presentation you'll hear from Keith. So thanks, Keith.
Maybe you're disappointed. Others might be excited not to have to listen to me. We do just have a brief overview. The full presentation that we gave to school committee is included in your binder that we gave you. So we're just going to do an abbreviated version so that we're not here all night. So as Mr. Crane stated, I'm really looking at our budget. We look at our 3 priorities. What are our 3 pillars for education? So starting by looking at safe and supportive learning environments, coherent curriculum, instruction and assessment, and focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those are the pillars of how we build our budget and what our spending is focused on. Part of the conversation about our budget this year has to do with out-of-district tuitions for special education students. I know we've talked about that in past years, and there'll also be warrant articles that we'll talk about to help fund a challenge that we have from 5 students that moved in, which is presenting a $600,000 budget challenge for us in FY23. So we'll be looking at funding that through the use of the circuit breaker reserve account for next year, through a one-time infusion of cash at the end of this fiscal year. We're also looking at the establishment of a special education stabilization fund. So as we've looked at this over the past 10 or 15 years, we've probably seen this on average every 4 years where we have a similar challenge. So we have students that move in, they go to out-of-district placements. We work really hard to create in-district programming. We get some of those kids to come back in district, and then we seem to have another wave that come in. And the way the law works is basically you get to quote-unquote stay put. So if you move in and you're already in an out-of-district placement, that's your default placement that we become responsible for. So we then work on establishing those relationships and programs to have those students come back in, which is where we really feel is the least restrictive environment for kids, which is where we want them, because this is their community, this is where they're going to spend time when they get older. So that's really the goal, is to get them back in district.
Keith, can I interrupt you for just a second?
Please.
And we had these 5 students move in, for example, and $600,000 for 5 students. That's a lot of money. And there are members of our community. They're our responsibility. I don't necessarily have a problem with that reality. But can you just talk a little bit about how it takes $120,000 to educate one student in a year, just to help us understand kind of that number?
So, and not every student costs that. So, right, we have students that might cost $60,000 a year that go to a consortium placement, and that's probably the average if you go to a consortium. Sure. It costs on average probably around $100,000 if you go to a private school. And then let's just say one of these students, I can tell you, is a residential student.
Okay.
So for a student who is residential, that student costs $340,000 a year, right? So the district is on the hook for that full expense, even though clearly we're not taking care of that child all day, the way the system is structured. And then over the course of time, there's what we call circuit breaker. The state gives us back a percentage of the tuition that's over essentially $50,000. We get back, in a good year, 75% of that money. In a bad year, back when we had the recession, that was as low as 35%. But that money is delayed when it comes in for a year. So really this increase will help us stopgap that expense in the first year, and then the revenue will increase, which will then allow us to help offset those costs to make it sustainable. But so it ranges anywhere from about 60 to 330. So as we dive into our budget, kind of as Mr. Crane said, this is what our budget looked like at the first pass before we knew if the Student Opportunity Act was going to be funded or not. So really looking at our contractual obligations around personnel and transportation, our forecasted growth at the Smith School. So we were adding a teacher, going down a teacher at Thorpe School just based on grade level cohorts changing, and then the addition of 1 teacher aide for a special education program at Smith, and then our normal just increased cost of licenses and software or inflationary pressures. So then the governor did release and funded the Student Opportunity Act for this year coming up. So that increase was $673,000. So we broke that into 3 different portions to be able to explain that to you. $99,000 of that is the minimum aid increase that we get every year, which is $30 per student. So that kind of goes into the general fund revenue pot that helps fund the overall town budget. And then the $537,000 or $573,000 was the additional Student Opportunity Act money. So we've talked a lot, I know, over the years about the Essex Tech enrollment and the overall enrollment in the district. So as we reflected on that, that would have been an opportunity where we would have needed to reduce teachers based on our high school enrollment. But by being able to utilize some of the Student Opportunity Act money, we're able to take that and save those 3 positions that we would have reduced and reinvest that into our highest need learners at the high school. So looking at our students that are in our therapeutic learning center, our students that are in our DRIVE program, which is one of our behavioral programs, and then our fundamentals programs, which is one of our most severe special needs classes. So really taking those students, putting more direct support, and hoping that by having more direct intervention, we can make more academic progress and behavioral and social progress with those students. These are ideas that we've talked about for years, but haven't necessarily had the funding to be able to do. So this year presented that opportunity. The other part is the $300,000, and that's the additional programming and staff. So as Mr. Crane said, really looking at adding 2 team chairs. Again, that will free up time for the psychologists. Those team chairs will run the IEP process, and then the psychologists can spend more time providing direct services to students, which they don't have time right now. Looking at the teacher aides, adding 2 teacher aides, 1 for the middle school and 1 for the high school. really looking at the unstructured time, so around restrooms, bathrooms, hallways, lunch, and those times of day, because that's where we're seeing really an escalation of the behavior. So putting in some more direct supervision. I think that's something that we hope that as time progresses and we kind of remedy some of those behaviors we would not need for years and years in the future. And then looking at our ESL students. So really, again, looking at mental health and behavioral supports for students at needs, as well as our high-risk students. So if we look at overall contractual obligations of approximately $1.6 million, looking at our staffing changes, you'll see that it's $316,000. That includes that $300,000 in Student Opportunity Act money. Without that, that change would have been $16,000 prior to that being funded. Looking at factoring in our retirement savings of known retirements of $176,000. Special education, again, that number is net of that circuit breaker infusion, but that's the cost, the 3% increase in tuitions of students that are already with us, and then our other non-salary and our transportation agreements. So then if we look at where we've been with our budget historically, we've been anywhere between 2.83% and really going up to 4.09. The 12-year average is 3.3%. Looking at a 4.37% increase this year. Again, without that $300,000, we would have been at the 3.69. So it's really seizing that moment of direct dollars coming in and then direct dollars going to the school department, which we don't always get that opportunity through the state, but that was seen this year. And then just sharing our state average. It is through FY20. They've not released the data for FY21 yet, and we continue to be slightly above the state average for our spending. That's all I have, and now we're happy to answer what questions you might have. And there is, I'll just add also, Esser information, so the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund, which is another infusion of funding that we've gotten over the last 2 years and going into, well, this is year 1, next year's year 2, and then into year 3. There's a whole presentation in section B of this, if you're interested in that, that talks about where we spent the money in FY21 and where we're going in FY20, where we spent in FY22 going into 23. Let me get my fiscal years right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sally.
Thank you. So, the budget increase is 4.37 over fiscal '22. But you're saying that's really more like 3.9 because a lot of the increase is this 637,000 coming in from the state. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, so yeah, 3.69%. Yes, so our original budget before we were sure that the governor was going to fund that was at 3.69%, and potentially we would have reduced lower than that with those high school FTE reductions that we outlined as part of the Student Opportunity Act money. So we probably would have realistically ended up around 3.4% in order to be part of that. I'm always thankful for Steve and Rodney and the team approach to the budget. But as we looked at that overall town-wide need, we probably would have ended up at 3.4 if the governor hadn't funded that.
Okay, so I'm glad for that funding, of course. And, with COVID, some of the hardest hits have been for kids, school-age kids, and for seniors. So, of course, I am concerned for the kids in the schools here in the town of Danvers, and I was very heartened to see the idea about having the team leaders to free up school psychologists and to have the 2 aides who will help deal with the unstructured time, as you say, the hallways, et cetera. But I still wonder if there's not some more that our town should be doing for kids who, everything you read, the percentages of kids suffering with depression, anxiety, and other things are just skyrocketing. And so I'm constantly wondering what could we do in the town. I'm glad the school psychologists will be freed up, but how many are there in the system?
There is 5.
I was going to say, is it 5?
I believe 5. And so you'll see also, and I'm just going to, if you fast forward also to page like B18, that's where we look at our Esser funding, right? So it's how do we put together those 2 components. So Esser funding is going to last through FY24. and then that money will fade out because it was the one-time funding increase. The Student Opportunity Act will go into our base for forever, right, for eternity. So we tried to structure positions that are in the Student Opportunity Act money for things that we know in 2 years we wouldn't have to fade. And then the other money, so you'll see like we are putting in for a behavior coach as well that will support all 5 elementary schools for students that really aren't on IEPs, but those overall, how do we help fix behaviors, and to be able to coordinate a lot of that work, as well as extra reading teachers and looking at interventionists for the middle school and the high school and academic technicians at the high school. And all of that is kind of around where you talked about coming out of COVID,
Yes.
where we hope that we can keep making academic and social and behavioral gains, and then most of those positions will fade off as the time goes on, and then hopefully with additional investments into the Student Opportunity Act that come in future years, then we can handpick the positions that we know need to go into our base to be kept,
Yeah, that things
to
that work.
transition those.
So the ESSER
in.
money is used for those additional support services you're talking about. Do we have any sense yet about how kids are doing in terms of their academics? Have we gotten enough information, for instance, through MCAS, to see what kinds of losses, if any, kids suffered during, especially that first year of COVID?
So MCAS is happening now, so we won't get those results until later. We are doing local formative assessments, and especially at the elementary level, looking at our reading data. So we gave kids assessments in September and then January. So our teams are following that through, and then looking at rank order in the beginning of the year and who got additional services, and then re-rank ordering mid-year to continue to focus on the kids that need help. And I'm not saying that kids don't need help, right? We clearly have a lot, but the academic gains and progress that we saw from September until, January really being back in person has been astonishing. Everybody's really digging in and trying hard. And then last summer we did a tutoring program that ran over the summer, and we'll be running the same type of tutoring program this summer for kids that we identify that are high needs or need that extra attention.
And how about MCAS scores or data from last year?
So last year there was no test given because of
I
COVID.
forgot that.
So we would go back pre-COVID for that and looking at those trends. So we're really gonna, we're gonna obviously follow that data and then really just compare ourselves to some of our peers of how we do as we go through this round of testing.
Okay, I'll stop my stuff at that point, but I might have some more at the end.
Okay, I got a couple questions for you, Keith. I know you just talked about the Student Opportunity Act, so that money's permanent, and that will help, and that's basically permanently allocated to the high school to maintain, or to support the programs that you identified, as well as the teachers' aides.
I would say that the teacher aides and the team chairs are permanently allocated.
Yeah.
Like those are expenses that I would anticipate will have year over year. My hope is that we'll, and I think every time that we have a position that we get attrition in, we always look at where is that position seated and is it seated in the right way or not. So again, we'll follow the progress of those students in those programs, and the hope is always that we get academic and social and behavioral progress, and that we can take kids off of IEPs and return them to general ed settings. And so if we really have some of that targeted support, I think the hope is that we could wean the high school off of some of those supports and then look at really at the elementary level of how we keep supporting special education there. And some of the things are little, right? We've called it basic skills for as long as I've been here, so for 13 years, and now we're really looking at why are we calling it basic skills? We don't want to be teaching elementary kids basic skills. It's special education, right? So really focusing a lot on changing that culture to really start early and intervening where we can have kids make progress there. So I don't think those high school positions are necessarily forever. For next year, that's what we're proposing, and then looking at how it evolves from there.
So just looking ahead at enrollment trends and, the loose knowledge I have of the number of applications at Essex Tech this year, we're probably gonna, enrollment at the high school is gonna drop again in all likelihood next year, just based on the smaller 8th grade class and a reasonable estimation of matriculation to Essex Tech. In that scenario next year, how many headcounts do you expect us to be losing at the high school?
I would guess approximately 30 more students. I would have to look at what the
So 30 more
8th
would-
grade classes, but probably about 30 lower. I will say that our high school team
Yeah.
is working hard at changing culture at Danvers High
Yep.
School and really making progress. And then for the first time, we're really looking at putting together a comprehensive marketing plan to how do we recruit and retain students. And I would say this year, we're really getting into having the core of that in pieces, and then over the next however many months, we're going to look at how do we really put that into a cohesive package that really starts, and it's everything from, last night we were able to show a video that students created about their experience at Danvers High, sharing college acceptance rates, to sending our athletes to field days throughout the spring, so that we're talking to kindergartners and first graders and second graders about how much pride you should have in being a Falcon, and really starting young to build that pride where students want to stay in the system. So we've put a lot of concerted effort and time into it. I think this is our year of developing it, so will it have the returns we're hoping for? I'm not sure, right?
Yeah.
But I'm hoping in
Totally
future
get it.
years that base.
Yeah, my concern, I guess my question is more driven on like the staffing side. Like, over the last 5 years, have we had to cut any course offerings from the Danvers catalog, or
We've not,
due to
right?
lack of interest, like enrollment going from 9 to 4, or just lack of capacity?
Right, and just like some anecdotal pieces, we've not had to make, comprehensive cuts in that way. That is something that we talk a lot about with our administrative team is, hey, we've either got to turn the enrollment around, or we're going to need to start looking at what does a smaller high school in Massachusetts offer for electives versus what we want to offer, while also trying to minimize class size, right? Because that's what everybody wants. So it's definitely where the conversation turned this year, as we were looking at those 3 positions, and we're lucky enough through the Student Opportunity Act to keep it, but that's definitely what we're looking at going forward.
And can you talk a little bit about I know you guys talked about last night, the early college program. Quick, talk about the participation, what kind of participation levels we're seeing there and what it provides the kids that are in it.
So we have about 19 students this year. So it's really, for this year, it's the sophomore class that's attending. It's exposure to higher education in the sophomore year. So they're taking high expectations or expectations of college. They get to go in, they're with a college professor, they talk about what the college experience looks like. It's targeted for students that are first-generation college students that haven't, had that opportunity. Their parents didn't have that opportunity, and the plan is to grow from there into academic subjects as they become junior, as well as starting a new sophomore cohort. So again, that's where some of that FTE that we didn't have to cut can be a dedicated teacher that helps support them as they really get into what, college English classes look like, and it's through North Shore Community College. And this year, what they're doing is not credit eligible to transfer, but the classes that they start next year will, be able to count for their college experience.
That's taking place over there, or at
It takes
North
place
Shore?
over there. So they get on the bus at the end of, I think, first block or second block. They hop on the bus, they go over, and they come back for the start of fourth block. So they miss 2 blocks during the day, but their schedules have been developed in a way that the academics that they're missing at the high school are small enough that they can catch up. And our staff has been incredibly supportive of creating that opportunity for them.
Okay, just ticking through these. They're a little bit hopping all over. On the special ed stabilization proceeds, does that get incorporated into the calculations for the budget?
It does not. That would be outside of that. So that $150,000 would be additional funding.
Okay,
That would
and
come from free cash.
so we'd basically be drawing that.
So the thought is,
So basically, when we're talking about spending per student, is that
it would not be incorporated until we drew it down and
Okay.
spent it as part of the drawdown.
okay? But
So
if you spent it, so if we fund it this year and you spend it next year, it would go into next year's number.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. When the dollars are actually spent, not when they're allocated to the fund.
Okay, got it. Just, obviously in the backdrop of all the warrant articles that we're going to be facing, can you talk to me a little bit about what the variable cost of educating a high school student at DHS is versus what we see as the average spending per pupil and how it differs?
So, unfortunately, you don't see big swings in that until you get into significant enrollment drops or increases. So the majority of our costs are fixed, like we just talked about. We don't necessarily cut electives because we want to offer kids that variety of offerings. So you'll see small increases. I will say that's definitely why you've seen us rise more above the state average, in hundreds of dollars per student, not thousands of dollars. But as our enrollments dropped, because so much of that is fixed to be able to have the offerings to pay for the high school building, to pay for the administrative support, that makes that number go up on what we're spending per kid. If we had 120 kids return, obviously that then changes your denominator, and then your per pupil comes down slightly. Looking at hundreds of dollars wise, and not, sometimes special education out of district spending drives that number a lot more, and that's where we've seen our increase, twice now over the last 5 years. That's really driven that up more than the enrollment changes.
Right. Okay. But while, over time, we would expect that number, holding the special education expenses relatively constant, we would expect that number to increase as enrollment went down because we're amortizing the fixed cost of the district over a few number of kids, right?
Correct.
And what's the level spending per student for a typical high school student?
Probably somewhere in like the $11,000 to $12,000 range if we take out special education expenses.
Okay, that's all on that topic. At the elementary school level, how many, with the new Smith School opening, how many physically empty classrooms do we have right now?
8.
Okay.
Next year it will go down to 7 as
Okay.
we have that
Adding
third
at Smith.
classroom go up to 4th grade.
Yep.
And just by the nature of enrollments, it looks like we may need to go up to a 4th kindergarten classroom there next year, just based on how the population has shaken out.
Yep.
But there might be a decrease in a kindergarten classroom somewhere else in town. We're kind of closely monitoring that. We made it through our first round of enrollment. Orientation was tonight, but we'll still probably have another 10% of students enroll between now and the start of the school year.
And like,
historically.
to like ballpark, like fully loaded budget cost for a teacher, like to staff one of those classrooms, how much is it per year?
We try really hard to hire, younger teachers when we
Yep.
start, so we budget around 66,000. But I'm just going to say that's fully loaded on my side. That's not fully loaded if we include the cost of a family health insurance plan, the implied cost of the workman's comp and all of those as that FTE count increases.
Okay. And then lastly, going to the teachers' aides and the issues with culture and behavior at the high school and the middle school. A lot of people want to see quote unquote improvement in that. Are we recording complaints about bullying and cataloging and then measuring them? I want to see improvement too, but the challenge I have mentally is how do you measure it? And I guess the first question is, are we measuring it and how?
So our high school has really created a new form that they're using. So they're using a form where students can report that to the administration to start to try to get some tangible data. The word bullying that we use in our day-to-day vernacular is different than the definition of formal bullying through the state. So we have very few formal bullying complaints that get filed. We've always had few. I don't anticipate us having a lot more in the future, but that's different than the student outbursts that you might get in a classroom day to day, and those behaviors are up. And that's some of what we hope the behavior coach will be able to help us put in those systems in place. And Mary could probably go into a 20-minute presentation on MTSS, our multi-tiered system of supports, probably actually even an hour. But we're really looking at that through our behaviors and academically. So looking at our tiers, and if you're tier 1, 2, or 3, tier 1 is where most of the kids are, then you go up to tier 2 and tier 3. And so really putting in those supports systematically across the district, which we've not had as thorough that we would like. It hasn't been as thorough as we would like. So that's what we're working on again with Lynn O'Neill's also our new director of student services that just started this year. So her and her team and looking at that behavior coach will help put in some of that to make it more measurable.
Okay. Two more for you. Sorry. I'm just curious, like from a long-term standpoint, cost of living, we typically budget 2 to 3% for salary increases and that sort of thing. But, everybody's keenly aware of where inflation has been in the last year. Are you I think our labor agreements are in place for a few more years, but anecdotally across the state, have you seen any significant contractual increases based on the, recent inflation and cost of living increases?
I think you're just starting to see them now, right? So people that are settling contracts for next July 1st, we're in a similar cycle where we have that in place. Where we are seeing it is with our part-time staff and our substitutes. So really looking at A, needing to keep up with minimum wage, but then B, if you're competing against, I don't know, do you want to go work at Target where they'll pay you $20 an hour? Or do you want to be a substitute teacher for $15 an hour? People are making the Target decision, right? And not wanting to be a substitute, right? Yeah. So we're really looking at how do we stay competitive with that with our long-term subs. So within our management reserve line that you see here, we do have some allocations to increase costs of those per diem and part-time staff to try to stay competitive. And then I'll say in our next negotiation cycle, especially with our paraprofessionals, we'll be looking at needing to make some significant investments there percentage-wise in order to stay with the labor market as a whole and what other districts are starting to do.
Okay. Along the lines of what you mentioned earlier about, you know, marketing the district and just celebrating the good things more consistently. Is there a head count for like website maintenance for the district and social outreach and all that kind of thing? Or I guess whose responsibility is that right now?
It's piecemeal,
Okay.
right? So again, that's not something I would say that we have a very good control over. We do get Google Analytics reports that we get off of that. We do have a social media manager, but it's an administrative assistant who has that skill set that we pay a stipend to. So we don't have a kind of a communications person or a website person that would really track all of that. So again, we're trying to look to come back and empower our principals and, again, put systems into place, right? It can't just reside with one person, and really trying to be more calculated with how we do that. We've invested in professional development training for our administrative assistants this year to really start to bring the websites back up to date and trying to get some consistency across schools.
Okay. I think that's it. And, you know, I know I told you before, but yeah, congrats on the move. I'm happy for you, but we'll definitely miss you.
Thank you.
That's it.
Mike?
Just a little comment to whom it may concern. We do have 2 or 3 pages in the budget book that we had with some of the material on A7 and so forth, but we would like to get the handout in the future of all the details, because having one night just to get this is not enough.
I already made a note with our administrative assistant in central office to make sure that next year we deliver budgets and we put it in the calendar a week out. So that way we deliver paper copies a week out before the budget hearing.
Sorry, then I had to direct it to you, though.
Nope, that's okay.
Okay. Has any thought been given to revising the 15-step wage chart?
The 15-step wage chart is, I would say, industry standard on the education side. And if we reduce the number of steps and we didn't reduce the top salary, it would actually cost us more money sooner than having more steps. The more steps that we have, it takes teachers longer to reach the top, which actually saves the town money.
Well, I don't know, if you kept them all at the same level for 2 or 3 years before they went up to a step, wouldn't that be better?
Well, that would be, but then you can't legally do that in Massachusetts because then people couldn't reasonably obtain the top of the salary chart within their working career. So really, if you wanted to do that, you would need to go from a 15-step chart to a 30-step chart. You couldn't say you're stuck on step 1 for 2 years. Mass General Law actually does not allow that anymore.
Okay.
So the question would be, have you asked to go to a 30-step chart?
What's your feeling on the previous administration? We won't go into it, but what's your feeling on having teachers with doctor's degrees or very high degrees teaching kindergarten or lower elementary grades?
Teaching and reading and writing is incredibly important. So whether that's or you're teaching physics, we don't, and again, industry standard in Massachusetts, I don't know of any district that distinguishes between the subject or what you're teaching and what they pay. That's how it works here in Massachusetts in the MTRS and the MTA, the Mass Teachers Association world.
Okay. All right, let's go to back to the psychologists again, excuse me. 154 is the item number, and if you look at C10, it says there are 6.2 of them, right? So if there's 6.2, and then there's another budget stipend as well. Is that stipend added on top of the salary, or is that?
It is added on top of the salary because they're required to work a week before school and a week after school that other teachers aren't required to get their paperwork in line. So it's paid for additional working hours that other teachers aren't required to do.
So it's another lump on top of what they get.
It is.
So they're up over about 100, by rough calculation, $106,000, $107,000. Is that right?
Yes. Yep. The top of our salary chart is over $100,000 now. So when you add that chart in, and our psychologists are seasoned at this point with the system.
Well, it's mind-boggling. I know I'm going back almost a half a century, but I never saw a psychologist from 1 through 6 or 7 through 12.
And I would say even in my 13 years here, the behaviors and the challenge that we're seeing with students that they're facing today are vastly different than when I grew up. They're vastly different from when I started here, and they are playing more and more of an important role as we keep focusing on behavioral and mental health.
I realize there's a lot of situations, but
Technology, right? We didn't have social media
No.
growing up. We didn't have Facebook at our fingertips
a lot of us also went through World War I and the Korean War as well, so we were in school, so it wasn't easy. But let that be. Stabilization funding. 304, what trade books are those?
So
Unless
those
I got
are
the warrant
primarily for our ELA courses, our English courses, and our foreign language courses. And those would be like general books that you would read. So it might be a book in French that's a novel in French that they're going to read, or it could be Catcher in the Rye, or it could be a new novel, and that's where we purchase the class sets from.
I took it as a misnomer, I'm sorry. I thought the word trade, you were talking about carpenter or plumber, or, they don't do
Nope.
shop, there's no more shop, is there?
We do have a high school wood shop. We
still
do
have
a
a
lot of, they still do building with wood and hands-on, and then we also do engineering and CAD and 3D printing and kind of the state-of-the-art shop in today's day and age.
Okay, on C13, can you tell me the difference between a board-certified behavior analyst and a behavior tech?
A BCBA, a board-certified behavior analyst, has to have a special degree, special certification, and a certain amount of training. So they're a highly trained staff member. A behavior technician would more be a bachelor's degree and working through their ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis trainings, still kind of in the work of getting their certifications. So it'd be like a physical therapist versus a physical therapist assistant.
All right. I think I got another couple here. C9, on that chart, I'm sorry, C8, I believe. The ones on the second column, like alternative funding and alternative, are those new positions or new?
No, those are positions
New
that are,
projections?
those are funded through our parent advisory committee, so our PACs. They'll often fundraise to help do that. So historically, the middle school's always done a magazine drive, and they've raised money, and then that allows them to provide extracurriculars that don't fit within our budget, or the Parents of Music Excellence at the high school level do their fundraisers that help to supplement that programming.
All right, and C9, that's the one I got mixed up on. There's this two separate columns with about 3 or 4, 6 or 7 other numbers, like Amnesty International and Drill Designer Advisor. Are those new stipends, or?
They're not new, they're just funded through a non-tax supported base. So the 322 number that you see at the bottom, that's the tax supported appropriation. The 24,000 would be those that are funded through donations from the parent groups.
Okay, I see that on your projections for student enrollment, it looks like there's gonna be 202 seniors this year. See if I can see the right page of that.
So that's our enrollment for this year. There's 202 seniors in the graduating class.
Right.
And then on page E2 would be what we're projecting. Again, those projections are often higher because we roll all 8th graders, but if you look, we typically lose, approximately 20% of the class year over year.
Yeah. Well,
going
okay.
into the senior year.
So we lost 5 students somewhere, because one total is 3326 and one is 3331. So I don't know where the other 5 are. But
So I could dig into that. This enrollment chart that we do is October 1, is what you see on page E2. The chart on E1, the chart on E2 is based on enrollment as of November 10th. So that's done 6 weeks later. So that would track real-time changes up until November 10th.
Okay, so 303. Okay, so I guess the projections seem to be a lot higher than what they should be, because when these other elementary classes that are going up with more kids, you're gonna probably lose some of them to Essex Tech, St. John's Prep, Bishop Fenwick.
I would hope that we would get back to where we were, where we used to lose, let's say, 17% of our kids, and now we're losing 22 or 23%. My hope is that we can, again, as we start our marketing and we start changing culture and really start young, that we can bring that back to where it used to be. But you're right, and that number does not get reflected in the projection between 8th and 9th grade because it's an unknown. So we have to plan like everybody's coming to make sure we have enough staff.
Yeah, so bottom line is we used to be up around 3,600, now we're down to 33 something, so we're actually paying more for less.
We're paying more per student for less kids, right? Because there's a lot of fixed costs that are built into our budget, and there's changing needs that we have to address. And so yes, our per pupil is up based on lower enrollment. And that's a trend that you're seeing across the state, right? I think you read an article in the paper the other day about Wilmington, and you read all of these different communities, and everybody is struggling with where did the kids go during the pandemic, and are they coming back? Because we also have to do a report that's called a Sending Schools Report, and we have to report every private school that kids attend, and those numbers don't always reconcile back to what pre-pandemic numbers were. And so we're trying to make sure that every kid is enrolled, but I think, public school in Massachusetts is struggling with this right now, and I think we're all hopeful that come September 1st that those kids come back to the public setting when they know we're going to be here in person all day, every day, and that we're not going to go back to remote learning. So.
Okay, I think that's it for me. Thank you very much for all your service, and our loss is going to be somebody else's substantial gain. So
Thank
best
you.
of luck.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure working with you. You've done a great job. Anytime we've had questions and needed answers, you've been there. And wish you the very best of luck.
Thank you.
A couple of points I want to make right now, or I'm going to have clarified, have been mentioned already. We are establishing, I believe, is this Special Ed Stabilization Fund. That's new. Will that be in the warrant, a warrant?
Yeah, there are actually 3 articles in the town meeting warrant related to the spike that Mr. Taverna described with the 5 students coming in. It's been 3 or 4 years, I think, since we faced this, maybe actually less than that. But so there'll be 3 articles. One is to cure the budget gap that they're facing this year. The second would be to establish a stabilization fund for special ed related costs. And then the third would be to make a contribution into the stabilization fund so that as these spikes occur in the future, they can be covered through a combination of circuit breaker funds and the set aside that would be appropriated out.
I haven't looked at the warrant, so what were you looking at? That's going to the first is going to be from free cash into the
Both of the so in the special town meeting there will be a $600,000 transfer related to the
Right.
FY22 budget. The FY23 costs associated with these out-of-district placements are baked into the budget that was presented tonight using the circuit breaker.
Reserve, yeah.
And then by FY24, a lot of the reimbursements from the state related to those out-of-district placements will be in hand, and we will have established the stabilization fund so that we'll be similar to debt stabilization. So we want to be able, as those spikes, the difference, of course, with debt is you're preparing and planning for the spikes. In this case, the school may not find out until a couple of months into the school year that they have a $340,000 placement that they have to budget for. And it would not make any sense for us to be budgeting in anticipation of those because we would be over budgeting by a considerable amount each year. So by having something in reserve the way we do for other reserves, we can better.
Is there a ceiling that you're looking at?
I'm sure statutorily there's a ceiling. I don't think that we would ever come remotely close to that.
I think what we've talked about is somewhere around the $600,000, because that's what the
Yeah,
problem's been.
that's what I'm looking for, yeah.
So if we spend it on average every 4 years, if we put $150,000 into it, then theoretically you'll need that in year 4 and draw it down and then put more in. And if you don't, then you could slow your contribution in year 4 until you do need to utilize the fund.
Would you be able, if you got to a certain level with the contributions getting, let's say, near 600,000, then would you withdraw it for a year? Is that
So
possible?
what Mr. Taverna just said, so if we would be looking at our enrollments, our out-of-district placements every year. If you were, so the gap this year is 600,000, so if you were to budget it for 4 years at 150,000, you'd have that in place. If the spike doesn't come, you're not going to add more to that fund. You'll have it on hand for when the spike does come.
But it wouldn't have to be, we wouldn't have to go through another, it's
You'd
not
have
gonna
to-
be a is it gonna be a warrant every year, Steve?
Not necessarily.
No.
There's a single warrant article to establish the stabilization fund.
Right.
And then each year that we wanted to contribute in, it would be no different from when we make our contributions to the OPEB stabilization, OPEB trust, or the general stabilization fund or debt stabilization. It'd be at the end of the warrant. Town meeting would be, based on X number of students coming into district, we recommend that $150,000 be appropriated in, and then the mechanism to come back out, which again, we'll cover all this in the warrant. You're getting kind of a sneak preview now. In a year where we found out mid-year that we had a spike, the school committee would take a vote and recommend that the select board authorize the expenditure. So town meeting appropriates in, the school committee and the select board would work together to use those funds for those out-of-district costs that occur mid-year.
Fine, thank you.
Could I just ask one, and I apologize?
Sure, go ahead.
Would there then be the anticipation potentially, because we would then conceivably be reimbursed for a portion of that money through the circuit breaker? Would we then put the circuit breaker money back into the?
No, we keep those separate. I think statutorily we have to keep those separate, but you're still using you're using the circuit breaker to offset as much of that cost as you can. The stabilization is sort of the spillover. So in a year where we don't have enough funds, we can.
Because the stabilization is not fixing your base, right?
Yeah.
The circuit breaker is offsetting the base. The stabilization will go in as a one-time cash infusion to bridge the gap
Okay.
until we're able to budget for it or use the circuit breaker funds.
Okay.
Okay. Briefly, you mentioned the bargaining units. You have 4 at the schools?
We do cafeteria, administrative assistants, teacher aides, and teachers.
And where are you now with those contracts? Because I know that we talked about yesterday, the town is finishing up on 7 units. We have 6 already agreed to, and we're working on a 7th. And you're not on the same calendar they are, right, as far as that?
No, but we're in year 1.
So
Right,
you-
everybody's in year 1, so we have 2 more years
2 more
before we
years,
need to go back out. We settled all of
We're
them.
on the same schedule.
Okay,
We
so
just
we
have
are
one
now.
that's still open.
Okay.
You beat us this time.
So
All right, now, a couple of just, these aren't basically necessarily financial questions, however. Are you coming up on the end of your strategic plan?
We are.
1 more year after this?
1 more year.
So you're looking at developing another strategic plan after the completion of this year? Or are we looking at a 2020, 22, 23? Is that when it's going to be developed?
I would say it'll probably kick off mid-year 22, 23, so that it's ready hopefully for, right, so hopefully we would kick
So
off.
you're going to be ready for you're going to have a new strategic plan for 23, 24? Okay.
Right, I mean, we've changed the way we do strategic plans, so we've tried to be more nimble with it and have it continue to evolve with us. So if you looked at our plan when we set it till now, it's slightly different, right? A lot of the pillars are the same, so it'll definitely be looking at it and developing a new one, but it's also
Now,
an
last one was
evolutionary process.
developed in 2018, I believe, if I'm not.
Right, and I would say that our plan that was developed in 13, sat on the shelf then from 14 to 17, right? But the one that's been in 18, you'll see that we talk about it every single school committee meeting. It's in our budget. It's really become a document that you have every day. So it's not one of these 40-page documents anymore. It's a 4 or 5-page, really roadmap for what we're doing. So we keep tweaking it. So when we go to develop a new one, it won't be that same classic process that we've always had, but it'll just be a continued evolution, but also looking to be visionary of what we would like in the future.
Okay, now that gets me to the question I think I've asked before in the past, and the page is A6. All right, and it's just a clarification for me. You have achievement metrics, external data, etc. and you go by the end of grade 2, you go by the end of grade 6, you go by the end of grade 8, and then obviously by grade 10, you pass MCAS and you're qualified to graduate, correct? I guess if you continue on in your
The
11th.
the type of test and the rigor of the test is different at all of those different grade levels.
Right.
So we always want every kid to be able to read at grade level, right? That's
Right.
always the goal. But those MCAS standards are calibrated based on the overall state performance on those tests. So in reality, the grade 10 test is an easier test. The kids pass it than what the test might be in grade 6, 7, or 8.
Okay.
So that's why you see those gaps of it's not that we only want 60% of kids to
That was gonna be my
meet,
next
right? We want
question.
everybody to, but the way the test is, you know, if I'm a kid in Wilmington or I'm a kid in Beverly, right? When you look at all of them, ranking them, where we fall within that, we're, you know, usually around the state average at the elementary level or slightly above. And so it's looking to make gains, but that gain doesn't mean we're gonna hit 100% because even, you know, I'm just gonna pick on Wellesley, I'm just picking random towns tonight. I'm sure they'll love listening to this presentation. They're not gonna hit 100% in Wellesley in whatever grade, right? Even your highest performing districts.
Through your strategic plan, you're able to chart this. In other words, you're looking for an end of grade 5, you want 60% of the students will score meeting and exceeding, et cetera, okay? So you can chart that, so you know if you're meeting or exceeding or you're not. And what's been the track record? Have you been able to meet this goal of 60%, walking, and the 90% actually by the end of grade 2, reading? Have these been attainable goals?
They have been as a whole. We've also lost our ability to track it because we didn't take MCAS last year,
Right.
right? And we changed the MCAS to go to the next gen. So I think that's where we talked about when we talked about the reading data that we collect at the elementary level. We're also tracking that local formative assessment data to make sure that we're seeing gains in students that they're making academic progress.
So if this particular plan stays in the next strategic plan, in other words, just, let's say, page A6, in other words, at some point, you're gonna have to settle on what you want these goals to be for, I'm looking at Mary, because I think I've talked to her about this before, but if you're looking at this set of goals right now, given the fact that you didn't have MCAS last year, the next coming years, you're still gonna have the opportunity to meet these goals if they do, in fact, stay into the strategic plan.
And we might also add a local formative assessment
Right.
goal, right?
But-
So you might see both goals in here because we spent a
Right.
lot of time talking about what that looks like over the last 5 years. So you might see it, again, evolve where we're not eliminating MCAS, but that MCAS isn't the only focus to track academic progress.
Right, okay.
Hopefully Mary thinks I'm doing an okay job. You're welcome to come up, but I hope I'm hitting on all of the presentations I've listened to her from.
All right, now, go ahead.
We're behind a little bit on the reading. We were on track pre-COVID to make the 90%. We're a little bit behind on that.
Talking
We
grade
made it
2.
back to 70%, and we're working,
That was in grade 2, right?
grade 2.
Grade 2, right, okay.
We're still hopeful for the 2 years.
All right, now, if you can just move to page C1. I just would like a little definition and a breakdown, all right? When we talk about district administration, all right, we're looking at full-time, is that FTE, full-time employee?
Yep.
All right, you're looking at 6. Could you just give us a breakdown of the responsibilities? Now, are those building principals? Well, how do you break that down? Because I'm looking, I don't.
So district administration would be assistant superintendent of curriculum, assistant superintendent of finance, superintendent, student services director,
Okay.
director of technology, and you're putting me on the spot. Superintendent, I said, most likely the athletic director. Yes, the athletic director.
Okay, and then your curriculum directors would be,
Elementary, middle, and
Right.
high school.
okay.
Principals would be one at each school, right? We have
so
7
you're talking
schools.
talking 7.
7.
Right.
Yep. And then the assistant principals are 2 at the middle school and 2 at the high school.
Okay, and do the same thing for me with the administrative assistants, just for clarification's sake.
Oh, you're really keeping me on my toes, huh?
Well, yes.
So administrative assistants would be The curriculum directors would be 2 that work in Mary's office. I'm going to work kind of backwards. Again, principals, the 7 different schools, they each have 1.
Yes.
Assistant principals, there's 2 at the middle school, 2 at the high school. 1 sits in the guidance area and 1 sits in the main office. And then district administration, there's 3 in the student services office and 1 that helps support technology and athletics and kind of general support.
Student services, define that for me.
Special education,
Yes.
generally speaking, nursing, other support areas like that.
Excellent.
Guidance.
Yes.
Yep.
And finally, I think what I'm hearing is, I looked at the numbers in the Smith School, I think 302 students this year. I think that's what you had in October when you started. But the projection is that the school was built for 465, I believe is the number. But that's based on the anticipated growth, population growth at the elementary schools, I think somewhere starting in 23, 24, 25.
Yeah, so we're hoping that it's still going to come. I'll say that the last time we did the projections through MSBA, they were within 1 student, 1 to 5 students every year over a 10-year period. The enrollment growth hasn't been what we've expected it to be, but we've also had a lot of external factors of COVID and remote learning and all of that. So again, if people can choose private kindergarten, and you have to come in 1st grade. So we're continuing to try to look at that data and ask some of our staff to really dig into, if we're not seeing it in kindergarten enrollment, we actually, even through MSBA, see approximately 1.1 1st graders for every kindergartner that we have enrolled. So we're hoping that we see some of that growth coming up
Where
soon.
is your kindergarten enrollment right now? I mean, I could look at the chart, but I'm just off the top of your head.
Off the top of my head, it's at about 260, with what we would anticipate to be at least 10% more that will enroll historically between now and September 1st.
Okay.
So it's in the ballpark, and we've, again, seen a natural kind of transition to Smith School for that enrollment growth.
At some point, if this growth, if it lives up to what the predictions were, we're going to have to move folks, youngsters, in from other schools. I mean, because if you look at some of the, I looked at, I think it was Highlands. It was 376 or something like that. Looked, to me, it was pretty jam-packed. I don't know what those stats mean. I mean, I don't know if that's accurate, but in my mind, it looked pretty tight for the school.
It is, right? They have 0 space. There's no special education programming because there's just no room in that school. So what we've tried to do is when we went to propose the Smith School, we talked about flex zones. So we really tried to make a commitment to a family that want to enroll in kindergarten, you'll stay in the same school through 5th grade, and that we're trying to move kids to the Smith School when we need to. We don't even have to do it right now because they're just naturally going there. But through those flex zones to be able to start the student in that different elementary school so then they continue through 5th grade. So you'll see like the gradual growth of the school and not just 1 year we're going to have to open 3 more classrooms. The hope is that we can keep doing it that way to still give them that K-5 neighborhood school experience.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? So what are we doing to load balance right now? I'm going to have 4 kids at Highlands next year, and it's not lost on me that every class, with the exception of 1, has more than 20 kids at Highlands. And Great Oak down the street, it looks like there's, in many grades, there's 3, probably an average of 3 kids less per class. Like, are we doing anything to, like, load balance on the margin? I can't just, it's 4 kids that I have to uproot to go to a different school, but are we doing anything to try and load balance across the classrooms between schools right now, especially with the Smith School?
We're trying to do it in kindergarten.
But
right?
not
so that way, but for like,
but there's no like proactive, hey, 4th grade, we notice you live close to the Great Oak boundary line. If you move your kid over there, he's going to be in a class with two less kids. There's nothing like that going on at the higher grades.
We've not done that
to load balance. Okay.
Because we really believed in that neighborhood school experience. It's been at the core of what, from what we hear from families, of what they like about Danvers is that they get.
No, I do too.
We haven't,
I just like Great Oak and Highlands are
right.
A lot of people that go to Highlands live closer to Great Oak. You know what I mean?
And again,
like physically.
it's hard with the pandemic, right? So we had students leaving and students coming back, and so where we were able to get some of that continuity historically has been up in the air. So that, again, some of the conversations we're having this year is even looking at kindergarten is, does it make sense to have 3 kindergartens at Highlands or at Great Oak where they've historically had that? Or is their enrollment now naturally lower, and do we need to move that to Smith School? And right, and really looking at that, again, but historically that's been at the kindergarten level. And then we try to put the additional supports in those other buildings where they might need.
If somebody proactively said they wanted to switch, would you embrace it?
Historically, no.
Okay.
That's not, right, it's not been part of.
So if
part of our
someone was
past
like, hey,
practice.
Great Oak has way less kids, I want to send my kid there next year, you would say no? If they were
Yes.
zoned for Highlands?
If that was the sole reason, we would say to you, what do you feel like your child's not getting at Great Oak, and how can we better support them? And let's look at their academic performance and what we can do to support that child. Because, I mean, honestly, then you get into somewhat of you pick your elementary school, and then if we have 100 kids that say they want to go to Smith, then are we going to get into a lottery to move kids to Smith? And so we've tried to stick with, pretty firm on that, because it just opens up a whole different world.
Can I just,
I yield.
thank you. I mean, the idea of neighborhood schools, to me, we don't have neighborhoods in Danvers. I appreciate what you're saying, and I appreciate that there are schools that are closer to people, and that's great. But the idea that there are defined neighborhoods like you would have had in certain urban locations, that's ridiculous.
So not to push back, but I can tell you the number of parents that we hear from that say, I went to Thorpe, I bought my house in Thorpe, I want my kid to go to Thorpe. I don't care that you're saying it's now Smith because of flex zones. I want my kid to go to Thorpe when they come into kindergarten. I can tell you I get way more of those phone calls than we get, can I move my kids to a different elementary school?
Don't confuse neighborhood with school district. People move into school districts, I absolutely agree with that. And that is a very, very big component of where people move and what values houses have and all those things in town. I agree with that. But the idea that there is some sort of an intrinsic neighborhood component to that, other than the fact that this is a school district that they've moved into, and the reality of it is that if we now, what you're telling me is that we have a situation that seems to be growing in which there is an equity in terms of some of these districts between the product that we're giving in terms of the number of students that are there, that's problematic.
And it is. And I mean, it's only become problematic again this year as we
Yeah.
came out of COVID. It was not a problem pre-COVID. Everybody was at 21, 22 on average. There are some spots this year. And again, as we're starting our planning now for next school year, those are the conversations that we're having with our principals of how do we address that? Because we're planning now for September, right? We start essentially March 15th to start to plan for what it looks like in 6 months. So it is a thing right now, right? And it shows up on paper. It was not that prevalent prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are streets and there are neighborhoods in the respect that if you drew there's going to be some arbitrary lines, and if you happen to be on a street and everybody lived on Bow Street in Danvers, and all of a sudden we said half the people on Bow Street are going to go to Highlands and half the people on Bow Street are going to go to Smith. Yeah, I mean, I guess we'd make the argument.
So I guess, right, maybe neighborhood isn't like, but the
it's
consistent school, right? We've always used the term neighborhood, but I hear what you're saying, because there's also
It's
where
a school-
it's just
it's a-
one long road.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, it's just running right through the middle of Riverside, but somewhere along the way that was put into there. But if you talk to parents on those roads, don't ask them to go to Thorpe rather than Riverside, right? Because that's where their kid goes to.
Yeah,
That's why they
I
bought
just
the
think
house there. And so,
I just think it's more about the school district in terms of that, and
So
people
that's
definitely
probably a
move-
better term than using the
People
word.
move into those districts to go to certain schools. I mean, I would assume, again, my kids are older, but I would assume that it would be very appealing as people move into town right now to move into what we would call the Smith District, because that's the new school, and it's a brand-new school, and I'm in that business. I know that those houses that are in the quote-unquote Smith District are worth more in some respects than some of the other districts because of the new school. That was a selling point that people would use.
right, and we're never going to get fully to making it Highlands or Thorpe or Great Oak look the same, or Riverside, but we are trying to look at what does equity look like. So we have clear touch panels instead of the projectors in every classroom, and so now every year we're buying 15 of those panels to put out into the other schools, right? So that we can at least have the technology follow and the educational experience, even if the hallways aren't the same and you don't have the AC, and we're never going to get it to that point, but trying to look at really those educational components to make sure that it's a consistent product despite what one of the 6 or the 5 elementary schools that you go to. 6 grades, 5 schools.
So, my final question basically is from what we're talking about right at the end here with Smith School. At some point, we're going to be moving youngsters into the Smith School. Is this gonna be done through what you call the flex program? Is that's basically gonna be, we're not gonna have a redistricting effort per se, I don't believe.
I hope not.
Right.
That's the goal. And we've had to do that, right? The largest class right now is in the 3rd grade.
Right.
Right? So we've done that already. From the time that the project got approved, we started moving kindergartners in then. And we've been using that flex zone now for next year will be year 5 to do that. And I'm just saying we haven't had to use the quote unquote flex zones in year 5, but we have used it in years 1 through 4 successfully working with families. And then once we say to you, you know, Ted, if your kids went to Smith, right? Once you send one kid to Smith, we're going to keep your family together. So once you send one kid to Thorpe, all your children are going to get to go to Thorpe so that they're together in their K-5 experience. So we've made that commitment, and again, we've made it work for the first 5 years of the program, and I think we can make it work going forward.
Maybe you don't want to answer this question, and I appreciate it, but in reality, when you start talking about flex zones, you're talking about sort of undesignated boundaries. I mean, is that realistic because of
Can I
bus
jump in for a second?
transportation and things like that?
I'm getting so bored just sitting here, I want to jump into this conversation. But I would say that when we were preparing to do the Smith School project, Keith's staff was working with the town clerk, and they were going parcel by parcel and looking at birth rates, actual children of ages 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 by parcel, when they were putting together with the school committee the flexible zones to accommodate. So there's nothing arbitrary about it. It was looking at actual birth rates across the totality of the district to try to figure out where do those lines need to be drawn so that you have, you know, proportionally the same number of students in Smith School as you do in the other schools. And I think that the work that goes in with each kindergarten class to make sure that you're building that balance makes a lot of sense, because in addition to the fairness question or the neighborhood/school district, the chaos that would ensue if you were not able to anticipate from year to year where particular students were going to go, it would be tremendously difficult for the schools to manage. But
You don't want to be moving children from across town.
I did it.
You know, that's.
Believe it or not.
Well, right, and we have charts on our website. So if you go to our street listing now, it'll say your homeschool will be listed, quote unquote homeschool will be listed first, and it'll say Riverside, Thorpe. So when you buy a house now, you know that those are your 2 options, and you can still complain, but don't complain, right? If you end up at one of those,
No, that makes sense.
those 2 schools, and there's interactive GIS maps, like Steve said, and so it's not just ad hoc. Each year, it's all predefined what those options are, so that it's all out there for people to see.
Thank you, I'm all set.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, again, that happened to us when I was a kid. We were sent to the Maple Street School, which, was downtown, and I went to one school. My brothers who were younger, went to Highlands. It wasn't the ideal situation. I don't think I suffered, frankly, but, I think it was not.
Here we all are anyway.
Exactly.
But did your parents complain? That's the question. Did they voice their concerns?
No, you didn't do that necessarily back then, but and we were, we eventually ended up back at Highlands when we were in like 4th grade and met the kids that were from Highlands, and we were fine. But so a couple of lines. One on line 181 on the budget summary is a 230% increase. What's that
What
line
page
item?
are you looking at, Mike?
A7, sorry.
So each year when we pass our budget, we take items that might be in management reserve and we pass it. So last year, those items would have been, last year if you looked at this page at this time, that number probably said $1 million. We settled our contracts over the summer. In October, we present to the school committee and we say, now here's our operating budget. So you'll see it says, so we make all of the transfers and we move everything up into the salary lines.
Okay.
We come into FY23, we do our budget, and again, this year, primarily that money is in there for non-union increases, what we're carrying, and then paying for those salary adjustments for our per diem or part-time workers that are closer to minimum wage to help with retention of employees. So it looks like a huge increase just because of the way the budget cycles go
Okay.
through.
In regards to fees, how many families do we have that get hit with, I guess, what we would call the maximum fee? Their kids, they've got kids in sports at the high school, they also do the buses, they pay the $1,000+ as a family for those two things.
A ton, right? We have a lot of families that hit that. We have a lot of families that are engaged. You know, it always comes up sometime around probably the start of the spring season. So there's a lot of athletes that don't have to pay to play spring sports because they've already hit that family cap. And so if you looked at our revenue collections by season, it goes down throughout the year as families hit that cap. But there is.
So I mean, right now we have about 850 kids at the high school. How many kids participate in athletics at this point, do you think? From
Probably about 200 a season
200 a season?
would be my rough, just.
So would you say that the majority of those kids play enough sports that the families would hit the
I think
maximum?
proudly, right? We have a lot of three-season athletes. We have a lot of kids that are in the band and then run track. We have a lot of kids that are in theater and then do this program. You know, I think that's one of the things I've always taken the most pride of here is that extracurricular, that outside of school activities and how robust it is and how many different and overlapping activities that kids participate in.
How much? I apologize for not saying, but do you know roughly what do we collect in those athletic fees in a year?
141, so probably about 180,000. There's 141,000 that's an offset to that goes directly to paying the stipends, and then there's about $40,000 that go to paying for rental of greens fees or rentals of gymnastics facilities and those types of things. So I like to say it's 60, 60, 60 that we collect each season. It's really, 80, 70, 50 probably, or whatever it is as it decreases based on.
Okay, so we in essence collect from those parents, from those families, about $150,000 is charged to them for the athletic program.
Yeah, closer to like 180. But if you're a family in need, that if you qualify for free and reduced lunch, those fees get waived. And we also have a waiver program if families can't afford it for whatever other extenuating circumstances. They can email their building principal, and they'll work with my office to waive it for other families that might not meet those requirements, but that do have substantiated needs.
Okay. And
again, it's something I would love over the course of time to fade out, right? I think that if you went back 15 years, fees were an alternative revenue source that helped offset budgets, and now as we, get into the mid-2020s and you look at equity, it's a barrier for some families because they don't want to ask for the waiver and they can't afford it. So I think over the course of time that it's something that
equity is a great word to use for that, because I think there's some schools that don't charge that fee to their students.
I would say I don't know if there's any schools that, well, I'm not, okay, yes, I'm thinking of the school that you're referring to, and I would not know the exact details. I know there's definitely a lot of K-12 districts that are working towards phasing them out over the course of time. So they might have gotten rid of middle school fees first, and then they're going to work towards building those back into operating budgets. But there may be another school locally that.
Keith, was that number inclusive of busing fees?
It was not. The 180 is, we collect, I think, 160,000 in busing. We collect 25,000 in music elementary fees, and then we collect for, other high school band and theater. We also collect fees for, which is in the back. Not the amounts, but the fees what activities we collect them for is E6. And again, not that it's great that we have to charge them, but we also haven't increased those fees, and I don't think the last 10 years. I think those fees have been consistent over that period of time.
And then you said the transportation fee is $540 for family. That's the max out that we have as well. How many kids at the high school level of families pay the max? Do you think the majority as well, or?
Well, that's more of like a K-12 fee,
Yeah.
right? So you're more likely to see that across levels than at the high school because
They can
our
drive
ridership
and-
at the high school
yeah.
goes down as kids can drive and they carpool. And
Do we charge parking fee
we do $20 a year I believe.
per lot? Do they get their own space? Do they have a
They
numbered
get
space?
no, they get a tag to hang in their window that we do make people, again, equity-wise, if we're gonna charge you, we're gonna make sure everybody actually is paid for it. So we have somebody walk the parking lot occasionally to make sure they're hanging. The valet, yeah.
Yeah. There
That's
was
what they make
valet
me do on
parking,
a bad day. They just send me out there to.
And I think we talked a little bit about this last year when we dealt with enrollments. And just to sort of remind me of that number, would it be fair to say that the only kids that pay the actual, when we talk about that $18,000 per kid, the only kid who pays that, I guess, nobody really pays that amount. Is certainly an amount that we do mathematically to come up with it. But if we were to add, say, 60 kids to the high school, we wouldn't simply take 60 kids and multiply it by $18,385 and expect our budget to increase accordingly.
Right, no, we could probably sustain an additional 100 kids in our high school without adding any additional staff.
Any additional staff?
Right, so the fixed cost then gets spread out across more students, which would lower that number back closer to the state average.
Yeah, so it isn't a situation, again, we would, our budgets are for the most part in terms of the operation that we have, we would be able to absorb back in if we were able to find a way to get kids back into the school system without any additional increases in terms of our budget.
Right, and then again, if enrollment doesn't go back up and budgets are tight, then we might need to start to look at what our elective offerings are, right, at the different levels and what decisions we need to make if that becomes more of a reality, because it looks different if you're going to a smaller high school in Central Mass versus if you're going to Lawrence High and what your course offerings are, right? Those are just different experiences, so we need to figure out where we are on that continuum and then make adjustments if needed as we go forward in the future. But, right, our hope is, again, to offer a diverse, robust experience. We want to offer all of those electives to students.
So there is a legitimate educational trade-off conceivably if our enrollments dip too low within that school system.
Right, and theoretically, you're going to make your enrollment dip lower because you're not going to have the course offerings that kids really want to get out of a public high school.
Self-fulfilling
right?
prophecy,
Right,
basically,
so it's like this, so the balance of being able to, and I think that's why we're so thankful the Student Opportunity Act is really letting us find that balance for this year to figure out how we go forward as we try to bring those plans back in to get more students to return.
And certainly, one of the ways it would probably have to be looked at conceivably would be in those extracurricular activities, might be to increase the fees in those to be able to make those self-sufficient, so to speak, for fewer, if our, rather than having 40 kids in a program, if we're only able to support that program with 26 kids.
Right, and then again, it all gets down to margins, because then if you increase your fees, if less kids want to participate, then you could be creating a different whole by doing that.
It also could be a positive effect if you didn't charge all these fees, that maybe people would like, and the kids would participate, more kids,
Which could
more
improve the
children
culture,
would.
make you feel more connected to the school, right, and have that.
Sure. Because as we know, there are some communities that don't charge fees, or limited fees.
At least some schools don't. I'm good, thank you.
Eric?
So I'm going to try, well, let me back up and say, I really appreciate the comprehensive responses. You really been responding with just a lot of knowledge, off the top, so I appreciate that. So hopefully my questions will, hopefully it's a softball for you. So we'll see. I will say that, I'll give you my premise up front. I'm trying to understand how our priorities meet where we've put new money, right? So I'm just trying to, as I'm looking at that, so if we could pull up the slide on priorities and go back there, and then I'll give you the 3 questions back to back and help you absorb them. I wanted to understand who is leading each of these efforts moving forward, some summary of what our major activity or energy is in those areas, and how much of our new money have we diverted into those areas. So who's leading it, what are we doing, and what resources have we put into them?
So I'll just say Mary, no. Mary and our entire administrative team, right? So as we look at safe and supportive learning environments. That's improving the school culture in each building. That's the behavior coach. That's getting psychologists into the rooms more. That's teacher aides at the middle school and the high school to work on the management in the hallways. We look at coherent curriculum and instruction. Again, not a lot of new dollars in the budget, but when we throw in Esser, that's the reading teachers at the elementary level. It's the instructional technicians. It's the high school schedule change that we made this year where we put in a community block that actually goes between both, because that's improving the culture and also creating those opportunities for academic growth. And at the middle school, we call it rise time, and really looking at intervention to close those academic gaps as soon as possible to help accelerate kids' learning. And then the diversity, equity, and inclusion, again, that inclusion piece, that's really what we're focusing on, and that kind of comes under all of our principles, and working on that as a unified team. And we've spent a lot of, again, looking at grant resources for how we do that. So I would say most of the new dollars are actually in the safe and supportive learning environments, and then looking at the alternative funding. So a couple weeks ago, we actually had, or last week, Northeastern come in, and we had them do a whole program with student athletes and our teachers to talk about how to be better coaches, how to be better mentors. And then the AG's office actually came out and said, hey, we're going to offer that to everybody in the fall. And we're like, okay, well, we were kind of a leader with this, right? We saw the value in it, so we had them come in. And so we applied for a $100,000 grant that was, deemed a hate speech grant through DESE, and right, so we got that, so we were able to pay for that programming ahead of time and look at, we're working with a woman named Janelle Ridley about building a board game and having kids engaged through building a board game at the high school level to really focus on those diversity, equity, and inclusion piece, but then that rolls up into all of the others because we want kids to see themselves in the curriculum, and it really then rolls out, and really a lot of it is through Mary and her team overseeing curriculum and instruction, but it's also the entire administrative team that does that.
Unsurprisingly, very knowledgeable response, so thank you. So there are two areas of opportunity that I think we have underutilized, or we could maximize, and I think to beat a horse really dead, right? I think with new money and one-time money, the website and how that relates to the marketing, so instead of being piecemeal, I think there's a huge area of opportunity now, that supports some of what our stated priorities are and the underlying priority of enrollment and retention. So I think that that's an opportunity that we really shouldn't overlook, whether it's with new dollars or just move something around. I don't think we should go another year and let piecemeal be how we proceed, because a year from now, we'll have the same conversation and we will have another generation that we've kind of missed the boat.
Fair.
So I really want to get that point across. And then I think leadership on the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece should be a little bit more explicit. I know that, on the town side, there is some.
I wanted to hire Jasmine. Steve told me no.
Yes.
That it was his hire. I tried that.
My point is, I'll
Yes.
take this, I'll take a cue from the folks over in Beverly, where their investment was on both at the school level and at the town level. And in working, since I do some work over there, I have found that to be really insightful, and a model for other towns to follow. And so I think those areas of opportunity with some of our dollars should be where, we should really follow our priorities. So I think on the DEI piece, I think there's an opportunity that we may miss if we don't jump on it. And then if it's not as explicit, we just have to do something. As a newer resident, right, I'm under 10 years, and looking at schools, I go to the website, right, so it is the primary tool that folks are going to for information. I think we do ourselves a disservice with the content of what our programs are and how we portray that.
No, and that's great feedback, right? Because that's when we look at, like I said, everything's reevaluated when we have attrition or we have openings. So those are things that, great feedback for us to take back as we keep formulating our plans.
So I really wanted to, one, understand that, and I can really see that progression. Future budgets might, a summary that follows the priorities, if you're doing that overview, these are the priorities and this is where we're putting our resources would be easier, but I'm fine with the narrative as you explained it. But I do think those areas of opportunity, it would be nice to have this conversation next year and say we didn't miss the opportunity, or we're waiting for miracle funds to come down and we'll get to it in a year. we shouldn't be there. This is, the pot of gold was this year, right? All the federal dollars, et cetera. We got to find a way to make it happen, or it's just not going to happen. But thank you, and thank you for your service. Clearly, our loss, because a lot of knowledge, will be leaving. So
Thank you.
I have just another
Yeah,
quick
go ahead,
thing.
Sal.
I know that in the last year, 2 years, the work has just been incredible. At the level of the two of you, and also the school committee, and all of the principals and the teachers, and I just have to say, I'm sometimes just overwhelmed to think of how much effort has gone into taking care of kids. It's just, it's very inspirational, and I'm, wanted to just acknowledge, especially in the last several months, all the stuff that you've been grappling with and juggling and handling to still produce this, this budget with as much information, Keith, as you've always been able to provide to us. I can remember the very first meeting that you came to, and I was thinking, why is that high school kid next to the superintendent? I really thought you were a high school kid. And then you started talking, I was like, wait a minute, this kid is really smart. So
I mean, I don't look like a high school kid still.
Say hi to the ninth grader.
Let me shave. Maybe I'll get a little bit that I can channel that.
But I really
2 kids later, the bags are, I know, a lot lower. And
I appreciate all you've given us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from the audience? Is there a
I'll move
motion?
the budget.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'll indulge me for one sec, I just want to thank Mary and Keith, particularly for all the work they've done this year. This has been a most interesting and challenging year, and they have really helped us keep the beat going, so to speak. So we appreciate their service, and I thank you all for the interesting questions. It really is interesting to see what resonates with each of you, and it's helpful. It informs us as we're going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. And I think that's it for tonight. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.